Welcome everyone and welcome back to PSAT Prep Live here with myself, Stephanie, and Boris. We also have our phenomenal colleague David, who many of you have already been chatting with in the chat, joining us today as another one of our PSAT experts to help you rock your score as you move on into test day. I see a lot of you were joining us here yesterday, but if this is your first time, I want to welcome you in particular. As while you might have seen us talking about in the chat, the way today's session will work is that we're going to rotate between math and verbal every hour, giving you a little bit of a stretch break in between. So you can see that we are going to start here with some math rules, exponents, functions, and more, and we'll do this for about an hour, in which case Boris will come on, we'll trade places, we'll do some verbal, and we'll kind of do that every hour, switching subjects for the duration of today's session. I see about half of you are new, so welcome to you as well. For those of you who didn't hear this yesterday, I do want to go over just what is the PSAT, why are you taking it? And for those of you who have heard this, well, feel free to join me in the chat with why you personally are taking the PSAT. In fact, that's the question I'm going to start us off with here in the chat. Why is the PSAT honestly just the best standardized test? What makes it so just really, it is my favorite standardized test. I like to say that like only good things can happen. So tell me, what is so good about the PSAT? While you do that, I'll give you a bit of an overview here. So the PSAT, it's almost 3 hours long, and you can see that we have these 3 different tests: reading, writing, and language, and math. The reading and writing and language, these scores come together to give you your verbal component of your score, and math is, of course, your math. It is broken up into 2 different sections on test day, one that has a calculator and the other where a calculator is not allowed. And of course, this gives you your total time and total question count. Now, a couple other things about the PSAT. There's no wrong answer penalty. This is fantastic. What this means is that you don't get points taken away from you if you get a question wrong. So it means that you should answer every single question. And what's awesome about this is that it enables you to really take charge of the test, really take charge of your time. You know, I just mentioned there's 2 hours and 45 minutes for the PSAT. Think of that as, that is your investment. Time is that is the really the primary resource that you have at your disposal during something like a standardized test. And you want to invest that resource wisely. You want to invest it in questions that are going to reward you with points, with right answers. So you don't want to invest your time on questions that you don't know how to do, or find really, really difficult, or just know are going to take a really long time up front. Those are the types of questions that you might just skip, period. If you don't know how to do it, don't waste your time on it, right? Bubble in an answer, move on, don't think about it. It's not worth your time to stress about something you don't know how to do. Those types of questions that you're like, I know how to do it, I think, but it's going to take me a lot of time to figure it out. Those are good questions to guess and skip over initially. And then do all the other questions, lock in all of those right answers so that you don't have to worry about running out of time on questions you know how to do. And then come back to those difficult and time-consuming questions at the end because, best case scenario, you actually have time, you work through them, you don't have to worry about it taking so much time because, well, you've done all the easy ones. So all you have left are time-consuming questions. And that's also going to enable you to kind of not feel the pressure of the clock as much. So the fact that there's no wrong answer penalty actually opens up this whole world of possibilities for how to invest your time. Now, I want to get back to the question I asked you, which is why is the PSAT just the best test ever? And I see a lot of you saying, because you don't lose anything from taking it, heart emoji, or heart text-based emoji. Absolutely, you don't lose anything. So for those of you who are not juniors, the PSAT is practice. It is a way to become familiar with standardized testing. It is a way to become familiar with what you're going to need to know, what you don't already know, what's going to come down the road for you when you start taking these tests later on, when you think about college admissions and scholarships. For those of you who are juniors, this is also known as the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test, and you can get a lot of free money for scholarships, either from the National Merit or from scoring highly on it. That can open up other independent scholarship opportunities. So worst case scenario, you learn a lot, get a lot of great practice, and set yourself up well for something like the SAT. Best case scenario, you score well on this test and you like earned yourself a free ride to college. So that is really why the PSAT is such a no-lose situation. Speaking of the National Merit Scholarship qualifying test, this score is based on something called the selection index. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail today on how this selection index is created because then we have a lot of math we want to cover. But that is a score out of 228. And this is the score that determines your scholarship cutoff for those of you who are juniors. And I see the majority of you here today are. You're also going to receive what's called your PSAT score, and that is the score out of 1520. This is the one that looks similar to the SAT score, and this score is derived from that selection index. You can read here to figure out kind of like the algorithm of how that all works out. When it comes to selecting national merit, it is based on that selection index. However, percentiles are based on this PSAT percentile score. So you can see if you are a 10th grader or 11th grader, kind of like where those score ranges might fall depending on what grade level you're in. For national merit, again, this is the top 1,000 students from each state to go on to compete to the National Merit Scholarship. The National Merit Scholarship itself is $2,500. That is if you are selected as one of the finalists. But even if you don't actually earn the National Merit Scholarship or become one of those award winners, there's lots of other scholarship money you can get from colleges and universities directly just from scoring highly on the PSAT. So whether you are a finalist or a semi-finalist, even if you are a commended scholar. So commended scholars are those who scored highly but don't quite make that top 1,000 in their state. There's still a lot of scholarship money opportunity there as well. This is based by state, so this link is fantastic. We found this year. I'm not sure where this came from, but this is the cutoffs of 2019 directly from National Merit Organization. So again, you can see based on what your state is, where you're taking the test, what those cutoff ranges for the selection score were last year. Of course, it's going to vary a little bit depending on who takes the test this year because you are competing against other students. However, those score ranges do tend to stay kind of roughly within the same range, and we can make sure we will get that link for you there in the chat. All right, so that is why you're here. That's why you're taking this. That's why you're preparing for it. For those of you who aren't a junior, you can't be eligible for national merit even if you like ace the thing, but it does mean that you can get some very good practice. Okay, so let's move on into some of this practice. We're moving on into exponents, functions, and some of these kind of arithmetic operations on polynomials. Now, all of these are in the same lesson because when we're talking about things like polynomials and when we're talking about many functions, especially something like a quadratic function, these are going to involve exponents. And many of these questions you will see on the no calculator section of the test. Now, I am going to preface this because I know we do have a wide range of students here today. I see the majority of you are juniors, but I know we do have a number of you who are freshmen or even in middle school. If this is a math concept that you just haven't seen yet, that's okay. There are going to be topics on the PSAT that you haven't covered in your classes yet, and you wouldn't be expected to know how to do them. So get comfortable if you are not a junior, especially if you are in middle school or a freshman, even as a sophomore. Be comfortable recognizing that there are going to be some topics that we review today that maybe isn't reviewed for you because you haven't learned it yet, and that's okay. So kind of pick up what you can from that, focus on what you do know, and recognize that on the test, those are questions you're going to bubble in a guess and skip over and focus on the topics that you do. Okay, so let's jump into exponents. Hopefully this is a topic that we're all at least somewhat familiar with. Exponents have two pieces. Let's just get us on the same terms here. When I talk about the base, I'm talking about the number that is being raised to a power, and that power, of course, is how many times we're multiplying that number by. So, for instance, 3 to the 4th power, or that exponent of 4 is going to be 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So we do have some of these exponent rules. If these rules aren't like just immediately review for you, I do encourage you to review them. You can take a screenshot of the rules we have up here right now. These are rules you're going to want to know how to apply because exponent questions do tend to show up most frequently in the no calculator portion of the math test. Because if you had a calculator, well, you just stick it in your calculator, and that's how you would cover it. Now I see a couple requests from some other types of math, like can we do sine, can we trig? You know, honestly, you don't see those on the PSAT very often. And if you do, it's like max one question. So even though there might be some topics that some of you are like clamoring for that you want to see, you want to focus on the types of questions that you're going to see in abundance on test day, because that's where your points are going to come from. Your points aren't going to come from these like really obscure advanced math topics that you may or may not see. You want to make sure that you've got these foundations rock solid, because that's where most of your points are going to come from. That's where most of the points do come from in terms of how these questions show up. So one thing to remember is that you're always doing slightly different operations. If you're multiplying two exponents with the same base, you're adding. If you're dividing, then you're subtracting. And, you know, just remember, anything to the 0th power is 1. This means, by the way, you can rewrite 1 as any number to the 0th power. And it's an application of this rule here that allows you to change the sign from positive to negative as you move that exponent under or over the fraction bar. If we were to think about it, if we were to rewrite, say, rewrite this 1 right here as 4 to the 0th power, you would actually notice that then we could apply this rule right here, and we would end up with 4 to the positive 2 power. So it's all about thinking about how to think about these rules, right? 4 to the 0th power, if I write that right there, look at that, that becomes 4 to the 0 minus negative 2 power, and we've ended up with 4 to the positive 2 power. So that's why you can just like magically change the sign as you move something over the fraction bar. It's because anything to the 0th power is 1. And by the way, the reason this is, when we talk about 0, we're talking about there's 0 difference between the numerator and the denominator in terms of their power. And if there's 0 difference between the numerator and denominator, then they're the same thing. If you have the same thing on both sides of the fraction, that equals 1. Okay, let's see how this works in a question. Now, again, we want to keep the chat spoiler-free. So go ahead and vote in that poll. You can tab over to where that poll is so you can see those multiple choice options there. I'm going to give you a chance to apply those exponent rules that we just talked about to this question, and then we'll go ahead and review it. All right. Now, a couple comments coming in on this question. A couple of you, I think College Board, not the real College Board, says if you do the first part, you'll get the answer. And this is something really useful to note. One of the ways that you can move faster through the math test is not just doing math faster, but again, using all the information you have available to be more strategic. Now, if we apply the method that we mentioned, for those of you who are joining us for the first time today, the first thing you always want to do is figure out, what am I being asked to do? So in this case, it actually tells us which expression is equivalent. And so that's what we're solving for. We're just simplifying this expression. If we look down at the other information we have, you'll notice that there are some very big differences between the different answer choices. Two of them have -3, one has -9, one has -27. We've got b to the 12th versus b to the 7th, right? So there's a couple different ways, a to the 15th versus a to the 8th. We can just use one component at a time, and if we need to do more, we'll do more, or we can continue to eliminate. We might not have to simplify the entire expression. So to this first point, if I were to start over here at the far left, b to the 4th to the 3rd power. Well, when you have an exponent that is raised to another exponent, you multiply those exponents. That's going to give you b to the 12th. That eliminates a couple of these answer choices, right? You can get rid of b and c. Most importantly, once you've done that, now you can see the big difference here is not the a's. We actually don't need to worry about the a's at all, but rather, what do you do with that coefficient, that number in front? And the coefficient is different, as guess 13 says. We have to remember to raise the coefficient to the power as well, because it is inside the parentheses. -3 to the 3rd power, we don't even have to calculate that. We know it has to be -27 because it's not going to be -3. It already is -3. And -3 times itself 3 times is indeed -27, which is going to give us answer choice A. So with these types of expressions that have multiple components, use those answer choices to help you eliminate as you go. You might not have to do all the math. Now, in this case, you might have said, yeah, but it did take me like a split second to sit there and be like, yeah, 5 times 3 is 15, and I would have gotten it anyway. And that's true. However, you may want to apply this concept in a place where it would have saved you a lot more time. So always be checking in with those answer choices to help you eliminate as you go. Anytime you're done, you don't have to do more math. Well, stop doing math, answer your choice, bubble it in, and move on. All right, let's take a look at another example here. Now, this is a no calculator question. No calculator question. And in fact, I'm going to remind you all this is a no calculator question by, let's go ahead. And this is, everyone always asks, no calculator, no calculator. There you go. I've nested it inside a star so we can all be happy about the fact that there's no calculator here. So don't use your calculator on this question as we go through it. Okay, well, anyone know what 36 to the 3rd power is off the top of their head without a calculator? Not me. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to simplify this in some other way. And this is why those exponent rules matter. Now, what's a way that we could start to combine these? We can start by looking at the numerator versus the denominator, or we can try to simplify kind of everything in one expression. Take a look. I've got 6 to the 4th power and 36 to the 3rd power. How can we combine these? You may be noticing that 36 is itself a power of 6. So we can start to rewrite this by trying to find either common bases or common exponents. So when you have to do exponent rules without a calculator, convert to common bases or common exponents. That's what you're going to have to do in order to solve this. Okay, so we can start looking and I can say, well, I can rewrite 36 as 6 to a power. All right, and once we've done this, we can now start combining, right? So 6 to the 6 squared, we're going to use that same rule again. That's going to be 6 to the 4th. All right. We can also think of it in this power. We got 36 squared times 36 to the 3rd. All right, I can combine these, and now what I have is the same exponent. And we rewrite things to the same exponent, we can combine them that way as well. So now I can write 36 divided by 4. All of that is to the 5th power. So what we're doing here is we're doing some arithmetic manipulation. we're trying to convert to a common base, or we're trying to convert to a common exponent. Because when I have either one of those two things in common, you'll be able to combine using your exponent rules. All right, I'm seeing some great chats coming in here about how to make 36 6 squared, or how to make 6 squared 36. Yeah, lots of different ways. And at any point along the way, you can start to simplify things down as well. You start to eliminate some of those answer choices. This is going to continue to simplify down. We've got 9 to the 5th. It's not quite one of my answer choices yet, but at this point, I'm recognizing I don't have any fractions. I definitely don't have a 2 in the denominator. We can get rid of those. There's really no reason I'm going to have to somehow get like 4 out of this. We can rewrite this 9 as 3 squared, and that, in fact, matches up with answer choice B. Okay. Now, a couple of you are saying, well, couldn't we make 36 a base of 6 as well? Could we have gone the other way? You could have, right? And sometimes when you have these exponents, there's often multiple paths you can take. If we had rewritten 36 as 6 squared, I would have had 6 to the 4th times 6 squared to the 3rd, which would have been 6 to the, what is that? 6 to the 6th. So you would end up with 6 to the 10th over 4 to the 5th. Now, we don't quite, in that case, have a way to get a common base or a common exponent. We'd have to continue to do a little bit of manipulation. At that point, we could have rewritten that as like 6 squared to the 5th, and we would have ended up back in this same place. So yes, if you had started this by rewriting the 36 as 6 squared, then it would have been a slightly different version of steps to take, but you would have ended up in the same place in order to find that common exponent. Now, you notice one of the things you cannot do is you can't just start canceling things out, right? We can't just say, well, I can divide everything by 2, or, well, I can, how many times does 4 go into 36, right? We can't combine any exponents if they have different bases and different exponents. One or the other has to be the same in order for you to do anything with them. Otherwise, they're like apples and oranges. Right, so you have to either have a common base or a common exponent in order to do any type of simplification or combination. All right, I saw a question, how do I get 9 to the 5th? Guess 2 to 9. So because once we've simplified it down here, we now have a common exponent. Woohoo! If I got a common exponent, then I can look at the bases and I can combine the bases. Well, if I just put parentheses around those bases, 36 divided by 4 is 9. Remember, notice how I'm just leaving this 5 as an exponent, it's just like tracking along. And so we have a 9 to the 5th because we, in this case, combine the bases. So when you have common bases, you can combine the exponents. When you have common exponents, you can combine the bases. You have to have one or the other in common. I know there's a couple more questions on this one. Continue to ask those in the chat. I think I've answered most of them. I see a lot of you are also answering some questions of your peers. I love to see this teamwork there in the chat. By the way, these are classic no calculator questions, because tell me in the chat, what would you do if you saw this question on the calculator portion of the PSAT? I would be saying, well, just plug it into my calculator, right? So again, these are the types of questions you're unlikely to be able to use a calculator on, because, I mean, if you get a calculator, well, then your math is just done. Plug it and chug it into your calculator and match it up with an answer choice. Now, the inverse of exponents is radicals. And a radical itself is an exponent. We often think of them as opposites because if you take the square root of a square, the two cancel out. And that is because a radical is written as a fractional exponent. So when you think of exponents, you want to think of whatever is in the numerator. So if I have something like a to the 2/3 power, right? So whatever is in the numerator, this is your power. And whatever is in the denominator, that is your base. So power is on top, base is on the bottom. Makes sense, right? I'm sorry, not base, root. So power is on top and the root is on the bottom. It's like the roots of a tree are on the bottom. So for instance, if I had a to the 2/3 power, I would square a and then take the cube root of it, right? And so we can see if I just have the square root of a, that is a to the 1/2 power. A is to the first power, but I am taking the square root of it. Same thing like the cube root of a. We could write that as a to the 1/3 power. It's useful to know how to convert these because you'll often see expressions where you have both exponents and radicals. And that's going to get pretty messy if you don't put them all in one form or the other. In many cases, I find that putting them in exponent form, putting them into those fractional exponents, are going to allow you to then use your exponent rules rather than having to deal with a whole bunch of radicals. So just remember, you can convert radicals into exponents by using fractional exponents. All right, let's go and see how we might apply this. All right, lots of stuff going on here. Now, what I want you to do as I give you some time to try this question on your own, I want you to think back to what we talked about on those first two questions. Use those answer choices to help limit the amount of math you have to do. That's, in fact, going to be your task. Your task is not to sit here and simplify this expression right now completely using all the math you know how to do. I want you to see how little math you actually need to do in order to simplify this by using those answer choices to help you eliminate. All right, I'm going to give you some time to think about this. I'll pause my video. Go ahead, Boris, if you'd be so kind to open that poll up, get those answers in the poll. Use elimination as you simplify to make this question go a little bit faster. All right. I love expert object says, I think this one is easier, but still confusing. It definitely looks confusing for sure. Now, one of the things you want to take away is when you're simplifying exponents or radicals, because remember, a radical, just an exponent. It has to have either the same power or the same base. Now, these both have a radical sign. Well, remember, a radical sign is a power, right? These are both of the 1/2 power. So everything under the radical sign has the same power, which means we can simplify it by kind of just lumping it up under one giant radical. So what we can do then is we can start thinking about how to simplify this. I can move the one before that, I can put everything under a giant radical, and I can start to simplify. Now, one of the first things you might notice is, let's see, my y's. I've got y to the 3rd over y to the 3rd. Those are going to cancel out. Y to the 3rds are going to go away. So my final answer should not have any y terms. Okay, so that's going to get rid of c, and that's going to get rid of d. And now the difference between a and b is there an x or is there not an x? That becomes our new question. So are my x's going to cancel out? And if I look, I have x squared and an x. So one of my x's will cancel out, but not the other one. And we're done. The answer has to be answer choice B. There's no other way around it. Notice how we didn't actually have to do all the math. We didn't actually have to simplify it down all the way. We could just start to use that process of elimination. That is why having those answer choices available to you and using those answer choices can be such a powerful time saver. Remember, when you have everything kind of under the same radical, you're just treating it like a fraction, and you can cancel like terms across a fraction if they are in the same term. Now we can see, I guess this means the rest of this stuff simplifies down into square root of 15 over 20. Fantastic, didn't have to do that. We just had to pay attention to what cancels y's do, x's don't. Bada bing, bada boom, we are done. So hopefully, if you didn't do it this way, you see now the power of elimination. Heaton says, I get it now. Cyber high five. Anya says, yay. Ash said, there is an X. Yes, there is. All right, let's go. Now, we'd get that square root of 15x if we continue to simplify this down, right? If we continue to do all the math, we could rationalize it, we could do this, but you don't have to, right? The key here is not to do all the math possible. The key here is to get the right answer. We know there has to be an X because they didn't cancel out, so the answer is B, and we're moving on. And that's all you have to do on test day. Don't make these questions more work than they need to be. Another way that you're going to find questions that have more work than they need is in extraneous, let me not put an S in there, extraneous solutions. Now, sometimes you'll do a lot of work and you'll get an answer that appears, but the answer is not one that if you plugged it back in, mathematically makes sense. This is going to happen if you ever create something that will give you an undefined value. So for instance, a 0 in the denominator. I want you to take a look at this rational equation right here. And I want you to tell me in the chat, which values of x will give you a 0 in the denominator? Okay, well, in my first fraction right here, if I plugged in a -4, that would give me a 0. So x cannot equal -4, because if it does, that's going to be a problem. I look at this fraction over here, x cannot equal 4, because if it does, that's going to be a problem. And over here, -4 and 4, we've already kind of covered those. So for this particular rational equation, we would say x cannot equal 4 or -4. Now, the way you probably learn to do these in math class is to actually do all the algebra, right? Solve it, solve the rational equation, and then at the very end, check for extraneous solutions. And that makes very good sense in a math class because part of the purpose of the class itself is to help reinforce all of those algebraic skills that you use in solving them. But on the PSAT, this is a multiple choice test. So it doesn't matter how much math you do. The only thing that matters at the end of the day is which bubble you bubbled and is it the right one. So when you see a rational equation like this on test day, before you start jumping in and doing any algebra, check for extraneous solutions first. You would be surprised how often extraneous solutions are answer choices, and you can eliminate them immediately. And sometimes that means you can even eliminate all but one answer choice, which means you don't even have to do the algebra. All you really had to do was like add up to 0, eliminate some choices, and be on your way. So always check for extraneous solutions first, eliminate them as answer choices, and then, and only then, if you need to do more work, then you can either solve the question algebraically, or remember, plug in those answered options to see which one works. You can either do it algebraically or arithmetically. Either way will get you the right answer, so do it the fastest way for you. Okay, let's take a look at this one right here. We have a rational equation. The very first thing I want you to do, I want you to tell me in the chat which values for x are not allowed, right? So step 1 is check for extraneous solutions, right? Which means like set the denominator equal to 0. Values of x that make the denominator 0. So what values of x are not allowed? Well, right away, I just have an x all by itself. So x cannot be 0. Let me write that. So x cannot be 0. X cannot be 8. Right? I'm seeing, yep, because if I plug in 8 here, that's not going to work. So x cannot be 8. And what's going to be over here? You know what? And if we looked at that, that would actually just factor out into what we already had. So those are the two. Okay, so x cannot be 0, x cannot be 8. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do on test is I'm going to look over here, and I'm going to cross out all the 0s and the 8s. And darn it. This is in a situation where that didn't actually help us, right? It didn't eliminate, well, it didn't help us eliminate. Right? It still helped us, but it didn't help us eliminate because we're no closer to our solution. But we have done the part that often gets overlooked, which is we've already checked for the extraneous solutions. So the first thing you do is check for extraneous solutions, eliminate answer choices that include them, and womp womp, we couldn't eliminate anything, so now you actually do have to solve what remains. So in this case, you have an option. You can either solve this algebraically, do some algebra, set it equal to 0, solve for both sides, or you can plug in 1, 4, and 5 for x and see if one of them give you a true statement. If they don't, then the answer is no solution. If one does, then you are done. I'm going to give you some time to think about how you personally would solve a question like this, algebraically or arithmetically. Both ways are great. Go ahead and do that. Let's treat this as a no calculator question, right? Because on test day, you're probably going to see these without a calculator. So no calculator. Go ahead and algebra or arithmetic, rock it out. Okay. We've got a couple different thoughts coming here into the chat. I see. Abhijit says, this is a tricky question. It tricks us. It takes so long to figure out the answer. Whenever you notice something about a question, when you're like, man, this question is taking a really long time, but I'm moving in a direction that I can do it. That's the type of question that you can circle and come back to if there's still other questions remaining. One of the big things with a test like the PSAT is not the ability to do the questions, but the ability to do the questions without panicking because you feel like you're running out of time. So if you start to feel rushed, if you start to feel panicked because the question is taking a really long time, that's one of the reasons that you want to be selective about the questions you choose to do first. Do all the easier for you questions first, lock them in. Then you'll know, hey, all the questions I have left are going to be time consuming. So if it starts taking you a long time, it doesn't matter because all the questions left are time consuming. You don't have to worry about that like little fear and anxiety that's like, but what if the next one's easy and I'm going to miss it? You've already done it. So you know the only thing left are difficult time-consuming questions. Now, Boris mentioned this in the chat, which was fantastic. This is an example of a question that you can solve algebraically, or you can plug in the answer choices and do some arithmetic. Do whichever way is faster for you. I'm going to show you the algebraic way with this caveat. I am showing the algebraic way right now so that those of you who did the algebra and knew how to do the algebraic way already can check your work. Right? If you don't know how to solve this algebraically, the goal right now is not for you to follow along what I'm about to do and learn it. So keep that in mind. This is for those of you who did it algebraically, just so that you can see and check your work if there was some sort of arithmetic mistake along the way. So to solve it algebraically, you would find that common denominator and multiply by it. In this case, let me go ahead and move my note calculator over. Multiply by the least common multiple, which in fact is this denominator right here. We multiply by that. So there we go. As we move through, we're going to see these things cancel out, and we're going to end up with another polynomial. We will then combine like terms, there we go, and solve for x. We end up with x equals 5. So if you did it the algebraic way and would like to check your work, there you go. If you did not know how to do it the algebraic way, then I hope you plugged in these answer choices. I hope you plugged in 1 and saw, did that work? Did 4 plus 2 over negative something equal this other thing? Yes or no? Did 4 work? No. Did 5 work? It did. So that's how you want to go about this. Remember, checking the answer choices is strategic when you don't know how to do the algebra, or if you do know how to do the algebra and you know it's going to take you a really long time to do. So again, 2 right ways to get to the answer choice. And remember, because we solved for extraneous solutions first, we did not have to plug 5 back in to make sure that it worked. If you didn't check for extraneous solutions up front, you'd have to do that, which is why solving for it up front is a really smart thing to do. Okay, let's talk about functions, inputs, and outputs. So our answer to that last one was 5. Think about a function as a robot. If I give the robot 0 apples, it slices up that apple, it gives me 0 slices back. If I give a robot 1 apple, it does its thing give me 3 slices back. If I give it 2 apples, it gives me 6 slices. If I give it 3 apples, it gives me 9 slices. Tell me in the chat, what is the pattern here? What is the robot doing to the apples that I give it? Which is another way of saying, what is the function that's being expressed in this table, where x is represented by the number of apples we're giving this robot, and the number of slices that pops out, the output, is our f of x. In this case, we can see for every apple I give the robot, it gives me 3 slices back. So we could write this as a function. We could write f of x equals 3. Oops. I got a little out of myself there for a second. F of x equals 3x, right? And that would be our function. Now, some of you are saying y equals 3x. If we were to graph this on the coordinate plane, this would actually graph the same thing as y equals 3x. And that is because f of x is an output. And on a graph, we would plot that as the y value. So you can, in fact, think of the output as a y value if you're plotting it on the coordinate plane. So the input is an x, and that output is your y value if you have x and y. That's what we're talking about with functions. Now, if we were to write a function as a linear expression, we would say f of x equals kx plus f of 0, which is true. But that's because this should look very similar. This should look like y equals mx plus b. Notice what's happening here, right? B, as for those of you, some of you mentioned this to me yesterday, is the y-intercept. The y-intercept happens when x equals 0. So f of 0 is a way of saying that. Writing something like f of 0 is basically saying the y value when x is 0. Well, that's our y-intercept. Our f of x value is saying the y value when x is whatever x is. So that's how you read a function. You read a function I'll say something like f of 2. This would be the same thing as the y value when x is 2, right? F of 0 would be the y value when x is 0. And so if you start thinking about functions like this as a relationship between x values and y values and inputs and outputs, you'll be able to not only plot these on a graph, but go the other way around. Look at a graph and be able to answer things about that particular function. Now there is one other function model. It's this one right here. This is the exponential model. You may have learned this in a slightly other way. You may have learned this as like P of t equals x naught plus 1 plus r to the t. That's the way you might have seen it in a science class. But again, we have the initial value, 1 plus r to the x. And it's important to note that r is the percent change expressed or written as a decimal. This is an equation that may come up, which will be good for you to know. This is one of those that they won't give you, but you will need to understand how it works. That is the exponential model for a function as opposed to a linear model for a function. All right, let's see one of these in the wild. Here we go. Okay. Whew, we got a word problem. Tell me in the chat, when you see a word problem, what do you do? Where do you go? This is our first step for the Kaplan method for math. It's going to be the way that saves you a ton of time on these word problems. Very first thing you do is go to the end. Figure out what the question is asking. As I said, look at the last sentence. And our last sentence tells us what we're actually doing. If j represents the number of games and f of j represents the number of students, which of the following functions describes the information in the table? So everything we need to know is actually just in this very last sentence. We actually don't need to read anything else. Everything we need to know is right here. We just want to know which of these functions gives us what's in the table. And it tells me that j is the number of games. So I'm going to write that in there. So this is j. And f of j is the number of students. I'm going to write that in there, f of j. And now what we're going to do is we're going to use our answer choices to our advantage. So all we have to do now is process of eliminate and see, okay, what can we do with these answer choices? All right, I'm going to give you a chance to process of eliminate these down. Boris has that poll open for you. Go ahead and try your hand at question number 5. Rock it out. All right, I'm seeing some great strategic thinking come into the chat. I'm seeing plug it and chug it. Pebble says it's quadratic time. Or Pebbles the cat, or Pebbles person says that. I think I read that Pebbles was the cat. And before we start plugging and chugging, we want to eliminate. So Anna says I'm the elimination goddess. All right, so the first we do is we recognize 2 of these are linear equations. 2 of these are quadratics. Before we start plugging and chugging, let's see if we can eliminate 50% of our answer choices by determining whether this is quadratic or whether this is linear. If it's linear, then it's going to have the same amount of change every single time. If it's not linear, it won't. So as we move from game 1 to 2, the difference here was 6. And the difference in the next game was not 6. That's all that matters, was it's either the same or it's not the same. We don't actually even care what it is. It's just not the same. So we're going to get rid of answer choices A and B, right? Because this is not a linear equation. So same rate of change, linear equation. I'm actually going to write that out here. Linear equation is constant rate of change, which we don't have here. So this is not linear. And now we can plug it and chug it, but rather than plugging and chugging into 4 answer choices, we only need to plug and chug into 2, or maybe even 1. For instance, if I'm going to plug in this first value, I can see that I'm going to end up with 1/2 plus 7, and that's not going to work. So we're done. I just plug that in. As soon as I recognize that gives me half a point, I'm done, and we are ready to just circle answer choice D. There we go. So you can do a lot of this mentally. You can use that elimination. You can really speed these things up. You know, as Madison mentioned earlier, a lot of people think of plugging in the answer choices or using elimination as like a last-ditch effort, right? The thing you do when you don't know how to do it the straightforward mathematical way. It's not the way to be thinking about these questions on the PSAT at all. If you can do less math and still get the right answer, that is not, you know, a last effort. That is smart. That is strategic. That is saving you time so that you can then go and do more math on questions that require it. So that is how you want to be thinking about this. Always see if you can eliminate first before you test those answer choices, and testing those answer choices is often the faster way to go. All right, let's look at this one right here. Okay, now, got a lot going on, but remember how we want to read these. This is asking us the approximate value of f of 0 plus g of 1/2. I want you to tell me in the chat, how should we look at something like value of f of 0? And let's put it into some words. I put it into some words up on the screen earlier. How do you figure out what this is saying? What is this actually asking us to go find on the graph? So we would read f of 0 as something that says, what is the y value when x is 0? Yeah, there you go. What is the y value when x is 0? So when x is 0, what is y? That's the way of thinking about it. As Jocelyn says, when x is 0, what is y? For the f function. So what is the y-intercept of the f function? So let's find it. Here's our f function. And the y value when x is 0 is like right there. Looks like it's like, what is that? 4? Something less than 5? I can do the same thing with g. What is the g value when, or what is the y value when x is 1/2 on my g? I go over here. It's 10. What is 10 plus 4? It's 14. That's all we had to do. So f of 0, what is the y value when x is 0? G of 1/2. What is the y value when x is 1/2? Find those 2 points, add them together. We are done. That is it. These questions look very complicated. They look like there's a lot going on. If you know how to interpret the graph, you're good to go. I love these questions on test day because these are the questions that like stress everybody else out, but they don't have to stress you out because you know how to read them. You're just going to find the function, find the x value, find the y value. That is it. And now Hayden 7 says, how do we determine the f of x value when it's not an exact number? Great question. If you're like, oh my gosh, is this 3, is this 4? I'm not entirely sure. You'll be like, it's 3 to 4. Because if you go and you find the g value is clearly 10. So we're adding 10 to something else. And there's only one answer choice that does that. They will not have you split hairs on the PSAT. There's not going to be an answer choice that's like 13 and 14 would both be options, and you would have to like figure it out. They'll not do that to you, so the answers will not be that close together. Big thing here is just to pay attention to which is the g function and which is the f function, and not to confuse the two. Fantastic work on this first component that we've done today. We've covered lots of functions, lots of exponents. I see some light bulbs go off. Guess 3335 says, oh, I get it. Cyber high five. Oh, and by the way, I see a couple of you wondering, like, wait a second, where'd this G come from? These are names of functions. So if you have two functions, you can't just call them both F because you won't know who you're talking to, right? It's like, I'm called Stephanie, Boris is called Boris. If we were both called Boris or both called Stephanie, it'd be really hard to figure out who you're referring to. So functions have names, and the names are just their letters. So this is the F function because someone called it F. This is the G function because someone called it G. You can have a function called any letter that you want. You can have an M function or an A function or a V or a T. You can just have any function letter name that you want. They're just telling you the different names of the different functions. So if this is F of 0, you just want to make sure you're looking at the right line. This is G, so make sure you're looking at the line that's labeled G. All right, cyber high five. Nicely done, everyone. I'm going to let you take a quick little break. And when we come back at the top of the hour, Boris is over here in the hot seat. Katie and David and Madison will still be with us. And we will delve into some PSAT verbal.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good evening, or depending on your time zone, good afternoon, and welcome back to PSAT Prep Live. My name is Boris. I'll be your teacher this hour as we work on question types in reading comprehension. Now, in the first session that we had today, Stephanie went over some introductory stuff for the PSAT. In this one, I'm going to gloss over a lot of it, but I do want to focus on one thing, which is scoring for the PSAT. Because a lot of people are curious about this, you're curious about scholarship, so I want to give you as much of an information dump as I possibly can. to help you make sense of this sort of weird structure of the test. So a lot of folks are saying, yay, Boris, hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming on by. Let us know how you're doing in the chat. I am doing great. I am your on-camera teacher this hour, but by no means am I your only teacher. Stephanie is changing places with me, and now she'll be off camera. We also have David and Katie, who are incredible PSAT experts, helping with questions in the chat, and also our tech wizard, Rich, who is making everything work behind the scenes. So let's have a quick chat about scoring on the PSAT with a more in-depth example. So what's going to happen is most people for the PSAT know that it is a test that is scored on a range from 320 to 1520. And it's like, why does the College Board do that? It's just like the 400 to 1600 on the regular SAT, but downshifted 80 points. So what's going on with that? Well, here is an example. What really happens under the hood is that for each of the 3 sections of the test, you get a score from 8 to 38. And this is a little bit odd, you might think, because on the final scoring, your reading and writing are combined into one verbal score. But actually what happens is that reading and writing get scored separately on this 8 to 38 point scale. So to use a very, very simple example, let's suppose that you get a reading score of 30 and a writing and language score of 30 and a math score of 30, just to keep the numbers super as well as duper simple. So what's going to happen is that each of these scores gets doubled and then added together to calculate what is called your selection index, which I'll abbreviate here as SI. So a little bit of math to cool down from our really intense math lesson. Let me know in the chat, folks. Following this rule of doubling your scores and adding them up, what would be your selection index if you got a 30 on reading, a 30 on writing, and a 30 on math? So 30 doubled is, of course, 60. So your selection index here would be 60 plus 60 plus 60, also known as 180. So that would be your selection index. Now, this is an important score, even though a lot of people don't really know about it, because this is the score that's used to determine whether you become a National Merit Finalist and whether you get a scholarship. So by the way, side right 5 folks, nice job calculating that score. And so a lot of people are like, well, what do I need to get in order to be a National Merit Finalist? And so they Google it, and then the Google results are all in this, range from 48 to 228. And it's like, what? What's that? I thought the PSAT was out of 1520, so why are you giving me stuff out of 228? Well, it's because the posted score on the PSAT is on the scale from 320 to 1520, but the scholarships are determined by the selection index, which is out of this weird range of 48 to 228. So that's what you're going to see if you Google it. Now, we managed to track down a PDF that is an official source for cutoff information. If you Google it, I don't know, I have not been able to find this PDF by any kind of normal means. So I'm going to post it for you in the chat. You should have already actually seen it there. You can click on that, and further down the PDF, you'll see a list of official, up-to-date cutoff information based on the most recent administration of the PSAT for what you have to get in each state on the selection index in order to hit your target score, or in order to get a National Merit Finalist. So it's not based on your 1520 score. It's based on the selection index score, which is calculated before your 1520 score. And that's how you'll know roughly, because it might be a little bit different this year, what you have to get to become a National Merit Finalist. And the more populous and competitive your state, the better that you have to do. So if you're in Massachusetts, you probably have to get a higher selection index to become a National Merit Finalist than if you're in, say, North Dakota, where you have less people to compete against, and so your score can be a little bit lower. And so yeah, Shade, you're going to use this score for National Merit Finalist standing, and the National Merit Finalist standing is what's used to determine scholarships. Quick bit of information about those scholarships. So what's going to happen is roughly, as of the latest numbers that we were able to find, 8,700 people get a National Merit Finalist scholarship. This is worth $2,500. But in addition, having that status of being a National Merit Finalist opens up other scholarships as well. So just to give you an example, I was graduating high school in Columbus, Ohio, which is home of the Ohio State University. And because I was a National Merit Finalist, I was offered a full ride to go to Ohio State University. So it's not officially part of the National Merit Finalist program, but Ohio State University is impressed by that, so they offered a full scholarship. And other schools do similarly. So that's the main value of the PSAT. As Stephanie likes to emphasize, only good things can happen when you take this test. If you get a 0, if you get a negative 15 billion on your test, nothing bad happens. But if you manage to get a really high score and you become a National Merit Finalist, then you can get some really, really sweet scholarships for getting into college. So that is that's a quick and slightly more in-depth look at the PSAT scoring for scholarships. Kartik, MVP of the chat here with the biggest tip, everyone move to Wyoming, lol. Yes, honestly, if you could do that, it'd be worth doing. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at today's topic, which is question types in reading. Now, in our yesterday's lesson, well, it was the second hour of our programming yesterday, we went over the passage mapping strategy for the PSAT. I definitely recommend that you click on the YouTube button in the video to check out our YouTube channel and see the recording for yesterday's programming if you want to review how to map a passage strategically. Today we're going to give you a chance to practice that again, but also we're going to introduce you to the idea of question types. Now, question types is a pretty straightforward philosophy. The idea is that if you know what kind of question you're dealing with, you're going to be able to deal with it more quickly and more consistently. Knowing what sort of question you have in front of you allows you to pull up a whole bunch of patterns of like, yes, if it's this kind of question, I do this sort of thing all the time. And if you know the question types and you can recognize them, it speeds up your work, and we could all use a bit more time on PSAT reading. So let's take a look at our first type, the global. Oh, hey, there's a great question, by the way, from Pebbles, or possibly Pebbles' cat, which is, what if I do well as a sophomore? Do I qualify? No. So that's kind of the thing, is it only counts your junior year. You can take it a bunch of times now. There's now a PSAT 10, a PSAT 9, PSAT 8. I'm pretty sure third graders can take the PSAT somewhere. I know some people send their 3-year-olds to daycare. Other people send their 3-year-olds to take the PSAT. But only the PSAT that you take your junior year of high school when you are an 11th grader, only that one can qualify you for a National Merit Finalist scholarship. So you will need to repeat your amazing performance a year later when you're in 11th grade. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at global questions. These are questions that we actually saw a little bit of yesterday, even though we didn't call them as such. They ask you about the big picture of the passage. So they'll ask you things like, what was the main point of the passage? What was the organization of the passage? What was the main idea of the passage? Big picture stuff. Now, when you see one of these questions, hopefully you'll already know the answer if you did the Kaplan passage mapping strategy, because this is what we tell you to do. And one of the reasons that we tell you to focus on the big picture and not get lost in little details is that knowing the big picture will help you answer these questions very, very quickly. Another type of question that we're doing today that is not as easy as global, and it tends to be everyone's bogeyman, is the command of evidence. These are the ones that always sound very similar to each other, and they ask you which reference from the passage proves your answer to the previous problem. It'll always say something along the lines of, which of the following provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Now let me know in the chat, folks, is anyone here already not a fan of command of evidence? Maybe you took the PSAT before or an SAT, you've seen them, they were weird, and you just didn't like them. If you do not like this question type, you're not alone. This is one of the most hated question types in the entirety of PSAT reading. So I have some very good news if you don't like them. If you do like them, what I'm about to show you will hopefully make you even more consistent at them. But if you don't like them, this is going to give you a pretty good fighting chance. Basically, what you do not want to do is actually read the answer choices. Because the answer choices are all going to be like choice A, lines 11 to 13. Choice B, lines 20 to 27. Choice C, lines 45 to 47 billion. Choice D, lines 60 to 68. And then people are like, okay, well, time to roll up my sleeves and slather my elbows in elbow grease and get to work reading these lines. Lines 11 to 13. Does that prove my answer to the previous? I don't know. Choice B. Does that prove my answer to the previous? I don't know. Choice C. And then you're sitting there for like half a friggin' hour, and then you get nowhere. You have no confidence whatsoever that you know which lines prove your answer. So what you need to do, folks, okay, very, very simply, is look at your previous answer and pretend Okay, play a game of pretend. Pretend that you and an imaginary friend are working on that previous question, and you picked choice C. And you're like, I'm 100% positive it's choice C. But your friend is not quite the PSAT rock star god that you are, and your friend's like, hey, why is it choice C? I don't really know. How would you prove it to them that C was the correct answer? Well, you'd show them a spot in the passage, be like, dude, read this. Doesn't that just say very clearly that ferrets are very cute? Oh, yes. Wow. If only I'd noticed that line. Of course. Okay, so it must be choice C. So figure out for yourself how you would prove to an imaginary friend that your previous answer was correct by pointing them somewhere in the passage. Now, that creates what I like to call your jackpot choice. Let's say that you find support for your choice C in lines 46 to 50. Okay, you look at the answer choices and say, well, is there an answer choice that has those lines in it? If it does, boom, windmill slam it, move on with the PSAT. Don't read a single one of those references. But if none of your answer choices have the jackpot, if you found some place to prove your answer but none of the choices have that spot, skip the problem. One of the things that Stephanie teaches really, really well is this concept of investment. You need to invest the time that you have in the questions that you're best able to get right. So if your proof on a command of evidence is not present in the answer choices, then that stops being a good question to invest your time in, because you're now going to have to read all the line references or go back and find more proof in a hopefully different spot. That's going to take forever. So to recap, either you find your jackpot and you pick it and you move on quickly, or you don't find your jackpot, in which case you skip the problem and you move on quickly. But at no point do you ever need to spend, ever again, a whole monstrous amount of time on these problems. Because if you have the right strategy, they'll be quick, whether you get them or whether you skip them. Now today, what I'm going to do is let you read a passage entirely on your own, because we covered how to do that yesterday. We'll look at some questions together, and then for our second passage, we'll do both things on your own. I'm going to let you do the passage on your own, and I'm going to let you answer some questions on your own as well. Here's how it's going to work. Passage 1 starts right here, and what I'm going to do is give you 30 seconds to read this much and practice the annotating strategy that we covered yesterday. Once the time is up, we'll move on to the next set of text, and I'll give you 30 seconds again there to annotate. And we'll keep going until we finish the passage, then we'll take a step back together and review to make sure you've got all the important bits. Then we'll take a look at some questions together. So, 30 seconds, starting now, read actively and annotate. All right, folks. So hopefully you got some annotations there for the first paragraph and beginning of the second. Let's take a look at the rest of the second paragraph and the beginning of the third. Again, I'll give you half a minute to read and annotate. Good luck. See you soon. All right, I hope you enjoyed making some annotations there. 30 seconds for the next batch of text. See you again in half a minute. All right, folks, and now for the final little bit of the passage, I'm going to give you half a minute to read it actively, look for the big picture, and annotate. And when we come back, we'll review it. And if you're like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on, I missed it yesterday, don't worry. We'll review this whole passage together before we take a look at the questions. So I'll see you again in half a minute to review the end. All right, folks, let's go ahead and go back and review this passage and our passage mapping approach. So here we have, in the opening blurb, an introduction to one of the characters of this text. If there's going to be characters, it's worth noting who the characters are. So let me know in the chat, folks, who is one of the characters in this story? We got our introduction to Ricky. And in the first paragraph, we learn that Ricky lives in the suburb. How does he feel about the suburb? This description of the suburb is not very flattering. So he dislikes the suburb. It's really, really lame there. Now, I saw Victory also mention, and a few other folks, Mr. Elliot. Yes, we get an introduction to Mr. Elliot at the very end of the suburb paragraph, and a much bigger description of him in the paragraph after that. And let me know in the chat, folks, what do you learn about Mr. Elliot in the second paragraph? Yeah, I noticed now a lot of the answers coming in the chat are about how terrible the suburbs are, and that's the only reason they're in the suburbs. It's just convenient to his dad to live in the suburb. So his dad's kind of selfish, he's making everybody live in the suburb even though it stinks there. And then Mr. Elliot does not get a very favorable critique in the second paragraph either. I saw earlier in the chat, PSAT Master pointed out that this passage really rips into Mr. Elliot. Yeah, Mr. Elliot is bad. He's mean, he's not nice. He's just, every single piece of description is just bad for him. So he's just not a cool guy. Then we get Mrs. Elliot in the next paragraph. And how does this passage treat Mrs. Elliot? Well, Mrs. Elliot is just great. She's beautiful on the inside and on the outside. Now, there's some stuff here that's a little bit difficult to understand. Here at the end, where he says, I have taken a plunge, he told his family. The family had not a word to say, and his sister declared the plunge had been taken from the opposite bank. This is a little bit flouncy and a little bit tough to understand exactly what's going on, but you should get the gist at the very least from this paragraph that Mrs. Elliot is a really beautiful woman and quite clearly seems to be out of Mr. Elliot's league. Now, the next paragraph begins with things only went right for a little time. Uh-oh. So what happened to Mr. and Mrs. Elliot after they got married? So I saw guest one say, she's better than Mr. Elliot, and yet Mr. Elliot leaves her. He divorces her, and he divorces her because she has bad decorating taste. So that's kind of weird. And then in the last paragraph, we have a visit from Ricky to his dad. So if we ever have a question about Ricky visiting Mr. Elliot, then it'd be at the end where we would look for that information. And this again just shows what a ginormous butt face Mr. Elliot is. Okay, so that's this passage. There's not a whole lot that really happens here. We learn about Ricky, who doesn't like living in the suburbs, bad guy Mr. Elliot, good lady Mrs. Elliot, bad guy leaves the good lady, and then bad guy is bad. Okay, so that's basically it. A lot of the passages on the PSAT are not actually going to have a whole lot of stuff going on in them. It's usually just going to be more about character description and character development. Now, if you weren't here yesterday, what we just did as we reviewed this passage is our passage mapping strategy. The idea is that you annotate each paragraph to create an outline of the passage, but you're not trying to memorize all the details. And one question that always comes up when we teach strategy is, should I look at the questions first? In fact, let me know in the chat if you've ever had someone tell you as a piece of advice for a standardized test that you should read the questions first before you read the passage so that you know what to look for as you read the passage. This might have been a teacher, might have been a friend, might have been an older student who took a test. If you ever had anyone give you that particular piece of advice, let me know. Like Pebble saying, read the passage first, or read the questions first, and then the passage. It's a really common piece of advice, and I want to be very clear. I don't want to judge anyone who told you that. I'm not trying to be insulting to them, but this is just like one of those very pervasive pieces of incorrect advice. So if you do know someone who gave you that advice, and it's someone you like, you should tell them that that's not good advice. The problem is that you have 9 questions per passage on the PSAT for reading, and you actually have 10 or 11 per passage on the real SAT. And your brain can only hold 5 to 9 things in short-term memory. So the math is not going to work out. In addition, you need some of that short-term memory to pay attention to the big picture of the passage as you read it. You can't have like 0 short-term memory slots available and get through a passage. So you're not really able to do it unless you're like some superhuman who can keep 20 things in short-term memory all at once. You're not really going to be able to memorize the questions and pay attention to the passage and understand the big picture of the passage without forgetting any of the questions. It just doesn't work biologically. So that's why we want to read the passage, annotate it, and then look things up as we need to when questions come up with weird stuff. So, good question, Ressa. What is wrong advice? The most common wrong advice I've ever heard about standardized tests is to read the questions before you read the passage. It doesn't actually work. If it worked, we would tell you to do it. I promise. It sounds cool. We were disappointed to find it just does not work at all. So you want to read the passage first, do a great job with it, and then do the questions. Okay, so let's take a look at our first question. Mr. Elliot is described as being. Now, this is a not quite global question because the whole passage is not about Mr. Elliot, but it's still a fairly broad question. A lot of this passage was about Mr. Elliot, and we already know the answer because it was in our notes. It was broad enough that we made it into our annotations. He's described as being, negative. So we're going to go ahead and look at our answer choices. Go ahead and vote in the poll provided by our amazing off-camera teacher, Stephanie, in the chat. She's got that poll open for the answer choice that matches what we already talked about with Mr. Elliot. So here, you might have gotten down to a tug of war pretty quickly between choice A and choice B, because C and D both have positive aspects to them. A and B are both the negative answer choices. So you have to consider the meaning. Choice A, monotonous and opportunistic. We don't actually know that he's repetitive. And while opportunistic people can sometimes be heartless and cruel, just because you jump at opportunities does not necessarily make you a bad person, nor do we really see him jumping at opportunities in this passage. But superficial and condescending, absolutely. We know that he's condescending from paragraph 2, and we know he's superficial because he leaves his wife over bad taste. So we're going to go ahead and grab, to begin this lesson, a very auspicious choice, my favorite PSAT answer choice, choice B for Boris, and move on with the PSAT. Okay, folks, so that's how you do a global-ish question, a question that is fairly broad in what it's asking about on the PSAT. By the way, good question from BG. In choice D, how is weak positive? It's not. C and D both have positive elements. Now, D has weak, which is negative, but generous is positive, so it crosses it out. A good trick for reading comp is to think of it this way. The correct answer does not have to be perfect. It just needs to not have anything wrong. So if there's anything wrong about an answer choice, you can cross that answer choice off very confidently on the reading test. Okay, number 2. According to the passage, the family's life in the suburbs is described as. Now, this is not a global question. It's a detail question, as we'll learn about later. According to the passage means the answer should be right in the passage. Now, let me know in the chat, where would we look up how the family's life in the suburbs is? By the way, a good question from Kartik. What if we don't know a word in an answer choice? Like, what if I don't know what condescending is? Then that choice, that problem gives you 2 options. 1 is process of elimination, and 2, skip it. In the case of the previous one, you could have crossed off A, C, and D by elimination, and then just picked choice B because you knew it had to be correct since the other ones didn't fit. The suburbs were in the very first paragraph. And just to quickly show you a little bit of that paragraph, the suburbs were very gray, they were monotonous, they were bleak, and the family was only there because it was convenient for Mr. Elliot. So those are the things that we know about the suburbs. And again, you might have forgotten that. That's fine. Don't feel panicked if you forgot something from the passage. That's the whole point of our strategy, is that you're not supposed to know everything. Memorizing all the details is just gonna, or trying to, is just gonna make you feel overwhelmed and zone out, and eventually your brain will just burst because it can't keep track of all the information. Get the big outline and look things up only when they're worth points. Great work, everybody, finding paragraph 1. Now we have reviewed the essential information about the suburbs. Let's take a look at the answer choices. If you'd be so kind, Stephanie, please fire up a poll for number 2. Folks, go ahead and vote for the choice that you'd pick on test day, and we're going to review it. And by the way, guess 3992, number 1 was B. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review these answer choices because they all got a little bit of love. Choice A says bad stuff chosen to accommodate Mr. Elliot. That is accurate. We do know that they were bad, and we do know that it was for Mr. Elliot's benefit that we were in the suburbs. So A was actually right, and I advise you just to pick it and move on. When you look at a choice and go, oh yeah, that matches my prediction, grab it and go. There's no point continuing to read the answers after you have found one that matched your prediction, because all you're doing is exposing yourself to the risk that some tricky thing the PSAT wrote will make you waste time sorting it through, and you might even talk yourself out of a right answer. Oh, but Boris, what if A was wrong? Well, then if A was wrong, then it's wrong. You pick it and you're going to get it wrong. That's still better than always second guessing yourself and making some mistakes anyway because of that. Now, choice B, everything about it's good, but the end of it is a little bit of a distortion. The family was in the suburbs because Mr. Elliot wanted to be there. He didn't want to escape. It was Ricky who wanted to escape, so we're going to cross off B. C says it's friendly. Nope, nothing positive about it. And then choice D is a bit tricky. It has the enduring to please the husband bit, but Mrs. Elliot has not been introduced yet at this part of the passage. So according to the passage, we don't know exactly how she feels about the suburbs. We only have been introduced so far to Ricky. So for that reason, we're going to get rid of D and stick with choice A. Now, this is not a global question. So why did we do it? Well, that's because we're setting it up for command of evidence. Note this very straightforward wording. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? It's like almost always going to be like this exact wording. Nice thing about these questions, I know they're hard and they can be a little bit scary, but at the very least, they're not like the Spanish Inquisition, that nobody expects. You know exactly what it's going to be as soon as you read it. So let's do our strategy. Let's go back and look at our answer to number 2. It was A. The family's life in the suburbs is an impersonal and unfortunate situation chosen to accommodate Mr. Elliot. Pretend you have an imaginary friend who does not get that that is the correct answer. Let me know in the chat, where would you point them in the passage to prove to them that is absolutely the correct answer? So the unfortunate situation is a whole lot of stuff, but there's only one part that proves the second part of choice A, chosen to accommodate Mr. Elliot, and that is the very end. There's no necessity for this. It was only rather convenient to his father. So the correct answer has to include lines 9 and 10. That is our jackpot choice, meaning we're really hoping to see lines 9 and 10 in an answer. If we do, we're going to pick the answer choice that contains those lines, but if we do not see those lines in an answer choice, then we're going to skip the problem and move on. Now, in this case, test makers were really splitting hairs. Every single thing is from paragraph 1, and it's very small chunks, but only one has our jackpot choice. That's D, so we're going to go ahead and just grab it and move on. You can waste so much time reading each of these sentences individually and be like, does this prove it? But if you look it up first, it's much easier to just pick the one that you've already found and ignore all the rest of them. So that's how it works when you approach command of evidence questions with our strategy, and it can be a lot easier and save you a bunch of time on test day compared to what most people will be doing to approach these problems. Now, before I give you one more passage to try entirely on your own, I'm going to introduce you to another question type. This is the vocab in context. Vocab in context questions have a trait in common with command of evidence questions, which is that they are very distinctive. In their own way, they almost always sound exactly the same. It'll always say some. Oops, let me go ahead and show you here. It'll always say something along the lines of, as used in line blah 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 blah, the word blah 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 most nearly means. There can be other phrasings, but it will generally be this sort of thing, where you have a word, a line reference where that word appeared, and then you're asked what it means. So let me know in the chat, folks, what do you think is going to be a classic trick the PSAT will play to try to make these questions more challenging? Oh, hey, I see guest 3924 and Daniel M. love these questions. That's good. These can be very quick. The test makers are clever. They have made some that are very challenging, but a lot of the time it's very quick if you're using our question method, which is to predict answers before looking at the choices. The main trick is the test makers will give you answer choices that are meanings of the word, but not the meaning that was in that line. So it's really important that you go back to that line, figure out what that word meant in that line, and then look at the answer choices before you make a prediction before you look at the answer choices instead of trying to plug all the answer choices back into the problem. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at a little passage snippet with one vocab and context question. One thing I like about this one is I can give you the passage and let you try a problem entirely on your own. I'll give you a minute and a half on my computer for this. If you'd be so kind, Stephanie, please open up a poll for question number 4, and I'll see you folks in 90 seconds to review it. Good luck and enjoy the practice. All right, folks, you guys smashed this one very nicely. Now let's go ahead and review it. So number 4 asked you, in line 7, exercise most nearly means what? So don't look at the answer choices. There's no point. Exercised could mean any of these things. It doesn't matter what it could mean. What matters is how it was used in line 7. So go back to line 7. It says, in voting, I not only committed no crime, but instead simply exercised my citizens' rights. So maybe something like used or utilized or made use of, and then there it is. It's choice A, used. So sometimes you make a prediction and it's right there and it's easy to pick it. Other times you make a prediction and you pick an answer choice that's a synonym for your prediction. But this is, again, an illustration of why our question strategy is to predict before looking at the choices. There's really just no point in reading these answers before you come up with the definition of the word in that spot for yourself. All right, folks, nice job. So let's go ahead and do some more passage and question practice. I'm going to give you a passage again to do on your own. We'll review it after the time is up for it, and then I'm going to let you do the questions on your own as well. All right, so here is our passage. I'm going to again give you 30 seconds, read it, annotate it, and when time is up, we're going to move on to the next snippet of text. I'll see you folks in half of a minute. It's a great question from Anya. Wouldn't looking at the answer choices be easier, though, and take less time? Anya, I solemnly swear to you, cross my heart, hope to die, wish upon a falling star. If it were easier to look at the answer choices, that is what we would tell you to do. But it just isn't. It's going to take a lot more time to sort through the choices and pick apart all the distractions than it is to predict an answer and then just match the choice that matches your prediction. Okay, so nice work on that first bit of text. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. This is a pretty long one. I'm going to give you 40 seconds to read and annotate this, and then we're going to we'll continue on after 40 seconds are up. So again, continue on with your passage mapping strategy. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed that bit of practice with that paragraph. Let's move on to the next one. Another pretty big one. I'm going to give you 40 seconds for this. Read, annotate, and we'll move on to the next one. All right, folks, one more. Nice little short one. I'll give you half a minute. Good luck. Enjoy the practice. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review this passage before we tackle the questions. So, beginning, let me know in the chat, what is the topic or the broad subject of the passage that you just worked on? It was a bit of a tricky one. The blurb kept the cards close to the chest. I know that the passage's broad subject is paleontology, but I don't really know anything more specific than that. So now I go to paragraph 1 and I'm like, man, I gotta get more specific. What does paragraph 1 get into that's like, okay, this is gonna be the specific focus of the passage? By the way, gotta give a sidebar. I've had a lot of you guys like, Boris, that blurb wasn't very useful. Let me just give it to you from paragraph 1. Fantastic, folks. Fossils and rocks. Yes, this is a passage about rocks and how the different rocks make different types of fossils. Okay, cool. Don't need to memorize any of these details. Do not try to memorize the details. Yes, it's called reading comprehension, but if a question asks about fossils and rocks, then you look it up. If no question ever asks, you never have to care. Okay, paragraph 2. Let me know in the chat, folks, what was one of the things that paragraph 2 gave you information about? This one was a little bit weird because it listed off 3 water-made rocks: sandstone, limestone, and shale. So I thought, all right, PSAT, I know what's about to happen here. You're going to tell me about sandstone, then limestone, then shale, and then PSAT was like, surprise, we're going to do shale first. The last one we said is the first one we're going to cover. Oh, what are you going to do now, Boris? Okay, so we have shale here, And we have a whole bunch of stuff there. And then we have sandstone and limestone right after it. And then we have more about limestone afterwards. So we have like limestone. Let me know in the chat, folks, what did this passage say made limestone more of a special rock than the other one? It says limestone is more complex, so it's not as straightforward as the other ones. Now, does it really matter if you understand the science here? No. Please, goodness gracious, no. Read it, get the big picture. First they told you about shale, then sandstone and limestone, then more about limestone. But that's it. If a question asks you for some like scientific detail about the formation of these rocks, well then by all means go back to this paragraph and look it up. But if no question ever asks, why would you ever have to care? It would be pointless to memorize things. Remember, you are here to score points. You're here to get a scholarship. That means bubbling in the maximum number of correct ovals in the time that you have. You are not here to learn about fossils. Learning about fossils does not necessarily help you get more correct answers more quickly, so it's not how you should spend your time and energy on the test. Okay, paragraph 3, huge paragraph, scary paragraph. Let me know in the chat, folks. What did this paragraph talk about? It was a bit of a tricky one because the beginning seemed to be continuing the previous discussion, but then we had this really fantastic key phrase, consider the fossilized footprint of a dinosaur, and then the entire rest of the paragraph talked about that. So you could have made a note like dino footprint example. Again, like I said yesterday, this is not the only way to annotate. What I'm writing is not the right way, and if you wrote differently, you're not wrong and doomed to fail, all right? It's just a way to annotate. You have to figure out what annotation works for you. So a few of you, for example, said fossil creation. Victoria said examples of fossil creation. Some of you mentioned that it was shale because this is a shale fossil. All those are totally fine. It's whatever helps you make the most sense of this passage in an outline form. So basically, now if you ever get a question asking about an example of fossil formation, this would be the paragraph to look into. Okay, and then we have the last paragraph, and the last paragraph was a little bit different. It wasn't all that scientific necessarily. Let me know in the chat, folks, what major point does the author convey through this final paragraph? This one, I like to just abbreviate it as like fossils good. Fossils, yay. We should totally study fossils. I mean, I personally think that people who decided to make a living studying fossils are maybe a little bit biased. I mean, how many paleontologists are there who are like, hey, so what do you think about fossils? Oh, they're the worst. Completely useless. Can't stand fossils. Hate them. No one should care about them. Oh, I just make my living studying them, but they suck. Like, no. Clearly they are going to love fossils. But anyways, unsurprisingly, this author thinks that fossils are just the greatest. Yeah, guess 9022. Yeah, importance. That's a great way to annotate this paragraph. It just makes it clear that in the author's opinion, it's very, very important that we study fossils. Okay, so recapping this passage briefly, the first paragraph in the blurb introduces us to the topic of the passage, which is fossils and rocks in paleontology. We get a whole paragraph about shale, sandstone, and limestone formation, then a detailed example of one fossil, followed by the assertion that fossil studying is very, very important. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some questions. So this one's going to be a little bit tricky because I will need to separate between showing you the question and the relevant part of the passage, and then also showing you the answer choices. Now the first one, kind of a hint in of itself, I don't really have to do anything. You might already be able to tell the answer without having to do any research. So I'm just going to give you a quick 30 seconds to try this one on your own. Vote in the poll provided by Stephanie for question number 5, and when half a minute expires on my computer, we're going to review. Good luck and enjoy the practice. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and review question number 5. This was a global question because it's asking what happened throughout the passage. Well, throughout the passage, the author didn't actually advocate that much. It was mostly a science passage. So the only advocating really happened near the end, where the author talked about how it's really, really important to study fossils and rocks. So choice A, it's a good hobby. No, this author is a scientist and is talking about what scientists can do, so it's not just a hobby. Choice B makes a comparison between different types of rocks. No, they're all important. Choice C says that basically few people are qualified to do this work. No, that's very negative sounding. This was a very positive sounding passage. Choice D is the one that says in so many words, fossils, yay. It's important to study rocks and fossils and all that stuff. So we're going to grab choice D for domination to score our global point, and we're going to move on with the PSAT. Now the next question is not a global, and it's not a command of evidence. As you might guess, this is going to be our setup for the command of evidence. So I'm going to give you the question, and I'm going to give you the lines that the question asks about. What I'm going to do here is give you 30 seconds to read the question, interpret it, and make a prediction. And then I'm going to give you another 30 seconds to match your prediction to an answer choice. So good luck. My 30-second timer is starting now. All right, Stephanie, if you'd be so kind, please open up a poll for question number the 6th. I'm going to give you guys now the answer choices for this problem. Feel free to pop in the poll the answer choice that matched the prediction that you just made, and I'll see you in a little under half a minute. Good luck. Got to give a special shout out here. So Katie, our amazing off-camera teacher, invited you to share your predictions in the chat for this one. Kartik had a great one. There are 2 different ways that they can be formed. Yeah. So why is it a more complex category? Well, if you look back in lines 21, 22, which the PSAT conveniently gave to you, it says limestone's more complex. Sometimes blah, 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 blah. Of more interest is blah, 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 blah. So there's 2 different ways that limestone can happen. So if you're trying to figure out, well, how does limestone happen, there's like twice as much that you have to study. So we look at our answer choices. So on this one, we were torn between choices A, B, and D. So choice A says it's formed in both land masses and on the ocean floor. It's a really clever choice. But we're talking about water rocks in this passage. So we're not concerned with rocks that are formed on land. So on land is a tricky one. But you see how the PSAT gotcha with that? You look in the passage of predictions, oh, there's 2 ways it can form. Oh, look, choice A gives 2 things. Brilliant takeaway from this question. If you pick choice A, make sure mumbo jumbo is the right mumbo jumbo. The PSAT can and will make stuff completely out of thin air that has nothing to do with anything and just slide it into a choice. And if it's fancy and scientific sounding, people will pick it. But here, because we're talking about rocks and water, land masses make no sense. We're going to cross it off. Always make sure the mumbo jumbo is the right mumbo jumbo. Let's take a look at choice B. Fossils formed in limestone require a very particular process. This is a really clever choice. It sounds very scientific and fancy. But remember, our prediction was there's 2 ways it can happen. B makes it sound like there's 1 way. There's a difference between saying there's 2 ways something can happen, or there's 1 very hard way that it must happen. It's not that. It's 2 ways it can happen. So it's not choice B. We're going to cross it off. C, nobody picked. And then choice D. It can be formed through a variety. Now, people are like, oh, I said 2, and this is variety. Well, a variety can be 2. So we're going to go ahead and grab choice D. Be careful assuming too much about words. Just because it says variety doesn't mean it has to be 10. If there's 2, then that's a variety. That's more than 1. We're going to go ahead and grab D for domination and skedaddle. All right, folks. Now, good question from Victoria. Would extreme answers usually be wrong? Yes, but you have to really emphasize usually, like you sagely did, Victoria, because Sometimes extreme answers will have extreme proof, and then they are correct. Okay, number 7, it's a command of evidence. So what I'm going to ask you to do is look back in the passage to where you made your prediction for the previous problem. Remember, the correct answer for that one was that limestone fossils can be made through a variety of processes. Go to this passage and look up where you would prove to an imaginary friend that you were totally right in picking choice D on number 6. And then we're going to move on and look at the answer choices. Okay, so hit me in the chat, folks. Which line could you show to an imaginary friend of yours to be like, dude, this clearly indicates that there's a variety, i.e. more than one process, by which limestone can be made? Well, you got to start in line 22 where it says sometimes, but then you have to go further down so that you get to the second one, right? Because you have to have 2 of them in your answer. So we need something in the zone from like 21 to at least 24 to be in the correct answer. Great, Cyber 5, folks. Just fantastic job finding those crucial lines. Now we look at our answer choices. What includes those lines from like 21 to 26-ish? Only one answer choice includes anything in that range, and that is choice B. And you'll notice choice C might be a tad like, oh, but it's 28. Well, that wasn't what we predicted. We never went up to 28. So we're going to cross that off. And A doesn't quite come up to 21. You really can do this. It actually works to do this, where you decide for yourself what range you want in your correct answer, and you pick an answer choice if it includes anything from that range. So grab B for Boris. First answer today, B for Boris. Last answer, B for Boris. I guess maybe we should do what everyone's been clamoring for here for ages. Get a quick little raft of barbecue stars here before we take your next break. So we're about halfway done with our 4-hour block today. Just so you know, coming up in our next 2 blocks, we've got advanced lessons. So coming up, Stephanie's going to be on the hour to do advanced math. And then after that, I'm going to come back up and we're going to work on some advanced verbal. So just so you know. But I do recommend that because we're doing advanced stuff, that you take some time to yourself here. Stand up, stretch, get away from the screen for a little bit, crack your knuckles, get some blood flowing, have a snack, have a drink, go to the bathroom, relax, enjoy life, get yourself to be your best self. And when we come back on the hour, we're going to pick up with Stephanie and advanced math practice. See you soon, everybody, and great work today.
Hey everyone, welcome back, or welcome, but I think welcome back for most of you. Like Boris mentioned, if you were here for the previous session, we are moving into advanced math and advanced verbal for the final 2 hours of our PSAT Prep Live this weekend. Now, this is called advanced math, and I don't want anyone to be afraid of this, but I will preface it by saying this. There are going to be some topics that you might not have covered. For those of you, and I think the majority of you here are juniors, and I'm going to gear that towards you for this, since you're the ones taking the National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test this week. For those of you who are not in your junior year, there are probably going to be some questions in this advanced math session that you haven't learned how to do yet, and that's okay. What I want you to do, if that's in your camp, or even if you are a junior and you haven't learned how to do something yet, I want you to start becoming familiar with the plan you're going to take when that comes up on test day, which is you're going to say, I don't know how to do this. You're going to bubble in a guess, and you're not going to worry about it. You're not going to stress about it. You're going to move on. As I explained, feel free to try to absorb as much of that information as possible, but if you still don't get it, there's a reason that these concepts are taught to you over the span of a week, or sometimes many weeks, sometimes months in your math class, and not in 5 minutes, right? If these concepts could be mastered in 5 minutes, your math classes would be much shorter. So I don't want you to set that expectation for yourself. Your expectation here is not to learn any brand new concepts. Your expectation here is either to, 1, brush up on some concepts that you have already been exposed to and maybe need a refresher on. 2, identify any mistakes you're making on concepts you're familiar with. 3, get comfortable learning how to say, I actually don't know how to do this, and just skipping it and letting it go if and when a question comes up that you don't understand. And 4, if you can pick something up as we go through the explanation, that is fantastic. But I don't want that to be the expectation you set on yourself. So let me know in the chat, how are we feeling about our expectation setting for this next hour of advanced math? And the reason I'm kind of prefacing this is because I know we have a very wide range of folks here with us today. I know we have some of you who are in calculus, some of you who are in algebra like 1, some of you maybe haven't even taken algebra 1, and everything in between. So I just want to preface that, if you haven't taken up through algebra 2 or if you're in algebra 2 right now, there's probably going to be some concepts that are new that you haven't seen before, and that's going to be okay. All right, so we're feeling good about this. I like it. So again, advanced math is going to be an hour, and then advanced verbal will come up in like 57 minutes from now. All right, well, okay, just to give you, I'm going to run through these really quickly. PSAT is 2 hours and 45 minutes long. We are focusing here on the math section. I want to give us plenty of time to go through this explanation, so if you would like to learn more about the PSAT, about the scoring of it, about how it can be used if you are a junior for national merit, I'm going to highly encourage you to watch one of the earlier lesson videos that will be available Monday night. Boris covered the National Merit Scholarship Index in his lesson on right before this one, and I covered a bunch of the scoring in the first session of today. So let's just jump right on in to our advanced math. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you about 2 minutes for each of these questions. That's slightly longer than the average amount of time you get on test day per math question. But these aren't average questions, right? These are the advanced concept questions. So it makes sense that you're probably going to want to spend a little more time on these because, well, you'll have used some strategies to save yourself some time on many of those other questions. All right, so that's how we're going to do it. We're going to go through those questions, and then we're going to spend most of our time here on review. So here is our first question. This is a grid-in question. So what I'm going to have you do here is I'm going to just kind of have you keep the chat spoiler free, and then once we're ready to reveal it, then I'll go ahead and let you put that there into the chat. So go ahead and take some time for question number 1. All right, well, let's see. This has 2 equations, and you might have been tempted by looking at this just to jump straight on in and doing a systems of equations, which maybe you had to do. But the very first thing we always want to do, go ahead and tell me in the chat, even if the question looks straightforward, what is the first thing you always do anytime you have a math question? Because in this case, it's going to make a difference. The very first thing you always want to do is identify what are you being asked to solve for. It's an assumption we make that, oh, I see two equations, I see x and y, I'm just solving for x and y, but in fact, we want to know what is the product of x and y. So since we want to know the product of x and y, that actually tells us that we have to go and do something, right? We have to do what? Go ahead and tell me in the chat. What is the very last mathematical operation that we are going to have to do? I love seeing these answers. What are they asking for? What do I have to answer? Yes, yes, yes. We have to multiply as our very last step. Okay, so we're going to have to find x, find y, and then multiply. This is important because if we just wanted x or y, that might change up the way we're going to do this. In this case, to find the product of them, we actually do have to find both. We have to find x and y. So we're not going to be able to save any time strategically figuring out like which one to solve for first. Okay, now there was no poll for this one because this one was a grid-in, but this does bring up a good point. Grid-ins are worth the exact same amount of points as a multiple choice question. Every single math question, whether it's 2 plus 2 or whether it's the hardest question you've ever seen in your life, is worth the same amount of points. And that's why I continually reiterate, do the easy for you questions first. And if a question is hard, time consuming, or you just don't know how to do it, skip it, guess, and move on. Okay, so we're going to have to solve for this using a systems of equations approach. Now, if I look over here, 2x plus 5y equals 49. I'm not going to be able to isolate either x or y without creating fractions. And fractions make my life hard. Same thing over here. There's no way to isolate either one of these variables without creating fractions. And I don't want to work with fractions because fractions are messy, they're hard, and you end up making a lot of silly mistakes. So what we can do here is we're going to use the elimination method or rather than the substitution method. Now, other thing to note, you could have done this with a matrix. You could have done this with your graphing calculator if this is in a calculator question, just by graphing these two and seeing where they intersect. Those are also ways to do this if you are feeling comfortable and proficient with your graphing calculator. I'm going to show you how to do it this way, which is a way that will work whether this is on the calculator or non-calculator section. For today's purposes, we said, yeah, this is in the calculator section. This question could honestly appear in either one, to be truthful. So we're going to eliminate by combining. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 says elimination is my best friend here. It sure is. So it doesn't matter which variable we set equal to, but we can see here that we're going to have to actually multiply both equations, right? Because we've got 2, 3, and 5 are all prime numbers. So there's no way that we're going to be able to use one of these numbers themselves as that common multiple. So there's many different choices here. I'm choosing to set the x's equal, so I'm choosing to multiply the first equation by -5 and the second equation by 2. There's many other combinations you could have done this. You could have done 5 and -2. You could have set the y's equal. That would have worked as well, but this is just one of the ways that I'm going to do it. So we multiply these together, and now notice how our coefficients of x are equal opposites. And remember, equal opposites, same value, different sign, allows you to add. And when you add, you don't have to worry about making a sign error when you deal with the other terms. And that is why equal opposites tends to eliminate silly mistakes, whereas if you set them as equals and you subtract, often sign errors do occur somewhere in the arithmetic. Okay, so our x's cancel out. -25y plus 6y is -19, -245, and 188 is -57. Divide both sides by -19. This is totally going to be a calculator question, by the way, now that we look at these numbers. And y equals 3. Okay, but we're not done yet because we actually need the product of x and y. So we're going to plug y back into any one of these equations. It does not matter which one to solve for x. The first equation has smaller numbers, so let's go there. We're going to plug that in, plug it, chug it, a little more arithmetic here, combine your like terms, and x is 17. All right, whew. We've solved for x, we've solved for y. But we're not done. We actually have to solve the question. Go ahead, tell me in the chat now. Feel free to get those answers in. What should we be bubbling in to our grid in? And while you do that, I want to ask a couple of questions like, where'd this 2 come from? When you are using the combination elimination method, you have to set the coefficients of one of your variables as equal opposites. Now, in this case, I looked and I said, okay, 2 and 5, my common multiple here is going to be 10. So I can multiply my first equation by -5, because 2 times -5 will give me -10. And I multiply my second equation by 2, because 2 times 5 gives me 10. So that's what I did. I decided upon a common multiple first. You didn't have to do -5 and 2. There's lots of other combinations you could have done here. But you do want to pick a common multiple that you're going to set those coefficients equal to, and then multiply by whatever number you need in order to have that coefficient in front of a variable so that it will eliminate when you add them together. All right, I'm seeing 3 times 17 is our final step. Here we have to multiply, and that is indeed 51. Now, pay attention here. We want to make sure this is the product. We don't want to subtract. We don't want to accidentally add. We want to make sure we answer the final question. And again, you could have bubbled this in as 51 all the way to the left. You could have put it over here as 51 all the way to the right. But the one thing you cannot do is stick it in the middle. That will not get you any points. Now, I see somebody asking, can I show you substitution? You know what? I won't, because I wouldn't advise substitution for this question. For substitution, in order to isolate one of these variables, you're going to end up with fractions. Ugh! Fractions are even more complicated to plug into a calculator, right? You end up with so much extra work, and you're going to get fractions in both cases. So if substitution is your jam, if you are really just like resistant to elimination, just note you can do it that way, but you will end up with lots of more difficult arithmetic as opposed to the elimination method, which allows you to keep some much simpler numbers. All right, so go ahead and give me a takeaway for this question. And again, think about how we're evaluating this. I only want you to be assessing your progress on this if you already know how to do systems of equations. If systems of equation is something brand new to you and you're like managed to follow along any of this, then nice. If that's the case for you, I hope that you like looked at the answer, saw what we were trying to do, where it's like, I gotta multiply, even if I don't know how to solve for x and y, then that's a win. So I want to know your takeaway here. What is something that you learned from this question, if it was review or if it's a concept you already knew? Right. Once you do that, we're going to move on to our next question. And our next question is going to be multiple choice. In fact, all the rest of the questions will be multiple choice, in fact. So you'll be able to use the poll that Boris is going to pull up. And Boris, if you'd be so kind, Boris already has that poll going. I love it. Here is our next question. Question number 2. Go for it. Oh, I like it. Looks like that review, for those of you who were here yesterday on rates and ratios, is paying some dividends here with question number 2. All right, so we are going to go figure out what our question is. We are not going to just go straight in autopilot and start reading about fuel efficiency, because who cares on the PSAT? What we do care about is what this question wants us to do. And this question says, how much fuel has this car consumed? So I'm looking for amount of fuel. Now, as I skim over this question, I see a bunch of numbers, and I say, okay, here's where I actually get useful information. Again, I don't need to know anything else from this question stem other than these last 2 lines. Remember, word problems are wordy, but you don't have to pay attention to all the words. Just go to the parts of the question that are useful. So our car travels 180 miles at 40 miles per gallon, and then an additional 105 miles at 35 miles per gallon. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to set up 2 equations. We're going to have to figure out, okay, so how much fuel did this part of the trip take? How much fuel did that part of the trip take? And then add the 2 together. So again, before we start jumping in and doing math, we want to figure out where we're going, figure out what we have, and put together a roadmap. I love saying that on ratio rate questions because they're always about driving. A roadmap of how we're going to get to the right answer. I see Alyssa has given me the equation we're going to use in the chat. Distance equals rate times time. As Pebble says, that is the dirt equation. So let's do it. We know the distance, 180 miles. We know the rate, 40 miles per gallon. And we're trying to figure out the fuel in this case. Now, even though this is the distance equals rate times time equation, remember, when we have a rate, whatever we solve for is going to be the unit of the rate. So 40 miles per gallon multiplied by miles is going to give us, we're going to plug these things in and figure out gallons. So 180 miles equals 40 miles a gallon. We can treat our time value here as a gallon, and we'll solve this way. So divide 180 miles by our rate, cancel those units out, and we're going to solve for gallons. Use those units to your advantage, right? The miles here, in this case, it is a distance. Our rate is a something per something. In this case, gallons is in the denominator. So our T value of our dirt equation, we're going to be like, that's going to solve for the denominator of my rate, which is going to be the units of gallons. So this first part of the trip took 4.5 gallons of gas. Now we're going to do the same thing for the second part of the trip. Let's divide using the same equation. 105 divided by 35 is going to give us 3 gallons. Okay, now there's lots of things we could have done here, but this question asks how much total fuel has the car consumed. So we're going to add 4.5 and 3 together, and that's going to give us 7.5 gallons. Nice job on this one, Cyber. High five. I see that was our most popular answer in the chat. So here is a big gold star for that one. Nicely done on this question. And we're off to another one. All right. Again, use big takeaways here. Use that equation. Write out your units. That way you'll know when you get the right unit that you did everything correctly. Let's go ahead and take a look at question number 3. Another word problem here. Think about the simplest way to solve this question. Right? Use the strategies that you have. Try not to overthink it. Here you go. Here's question number 3. Go ahead and vote in the Boris's poll when you've got it. I love this comment coming in from Kid Cudi that says, I feel like this question is too easy and it has a trick aspect to it. Yeah, it's funny. What makes this question difficult is that it feels like it should be more difficult than it actually is. And then the trick here is that it's actually not as confusing as you're probably making it out to be if you're finding this question is very, very difficult. So questions are straightforward sometimes on the PSAT, even questions that look like they shouldn't be. So in this case, we want to, again, figure out what we're solving for. What is the change in length between the original escalator measurement and its corrected value? So we're looking for a difference, the difference between original and the new, basically. What is the difference? And so we might be thinking, well, I need to know what was it originally, what is it now, and let's subtract the two and figure out what the difference is. Okay, so that's probably what we're thinking at this stage of the game. Let's read what we have. We have a 75-foot escalator. The difference in height was supposed to be 40 feet. Well, that's my original value. Nice. But due to a calculation error, this figure must be reduced by 25%. Hold up. This question wants to know what's the difference between the original and new, and it just told us. It told us it needs to be 25% smaller. So the difference is going to be 25% of what it was. Okay. The angle is the same. What's the difference between the change in length in feet between the original escalator measurement and its corrected value? All right. Well, we've got some triangles. We have a 75-foot escalator with a 40-foot height. Well, our new height is going to be 25% of what it was. And our new escalator length is going to be 25% less than what it was. So all we have to figure out here is what is 25% of 75 feet? Because that's what's going to be the difference here. This is going to be an 18.75-foot difference. Now, if this wanted to know what was the actual length of the new escalator, we would subtract that from 75. But we don't need that. We just need to know what's the difference. And the difference is going to be 18.75 feet. We're shrinking it by 25%. That's 25% of it. We're done. That's it. So this was a question that was in some ways testing similar triangles. But in many ways, the math involved was just calculating a percentage. So here, the math itself was probably much less onerous than just setting up the problem and figuring out what's going on. Now, I know I saw a good question here that came in that says, so if it's 25% off, does that mean we're adding 25%, taking something off? So you can multiply by 25% and that will tell you what's coming off of it. If you wanted to know what the new length was, then you could just multiply by 75% because that's what the remaining length would be. All right. PCD says, oh, lol, I thought it was a trig question. Yeah, you can always make math questions harder on the PSAT than they need to be. But again, don't overthink it. It is very unlikely that you're going to see any trig on the PSAT. Even on the SAT, you're talking like one question max. So don't worry about trig on the PSAT. It's not going to be there. If it's there at all, it's like maximum one question. It's really not a big component of the test. All right, let's go ahead and jump into another concept. Here we go. Question number 4. We've got some of those radicals that we were just talking about in our earlier session. Remember, you cannot have radicals in the denominator. So you are going to have to do something to get them out of there. Rationalize this one. That's my hint for you. Here you go. Here's your timer. And Boris has that poll open. Thanks, Boris. Go for it. Oh, I love reading some of your thought processes coming into the chat because this is going to be a very useful question. As David says, this is a good one, and I can see that it's going to be a good one to learn from in particular. And then Afisa, you ask a fantastic question, which is, can the roots of 3 cancel out? You know, especially in light of what we were doing with the systems of equations, where I said, well, you want them to be equal opposite signs because when you add them together, they go away. But notice how we're not adding the numerator and the denominator together, right? This is just a fraction. And in a fraction, you can only eliminate factors. In this case, we're adding and subtracting, like we have basically 2 terms here and 2 terms here. We can't, this is what we cannot do. We cannot just come in here and be like, well, I'm just going to cancel out my root 3's because one's positive and one's negative, because we're not adding these things together. So the only time we can just cancel something out between the numerator and the denominator is if we just have, you know, one term, and we can cancel out the factors of the term, or if we have multiple factors, we can cancel out factors. So only factors cancel between the numerator and the denominator, which means that we can't just start hacking away at this. We're going to have to do a little bit of rearranging. We're going to have to rationalize it. Now, our question says, what's the following is equivalent? Okay, so we're just trying to rearrange this to manipulate it somehow. And we're going to do that, as NG says, can we rationalize? Yes, we can. And when you rationalize, we're going to do what Victoria says. I think you had to do the conjugation thingy. Yes, Victoria, we are going to multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate is when you have a binomial, right, 2 terms here in the denominator. One of them is a radical. So to get rid of it, we're going to multiply by what's called its conjugate, which is the same thing, but with the sign flipped around. Now, I want to pause right here, and I want to be very careful to point out the fact that the conjugate of the denominator happens to be the numerator is totally coincidental, right? It has not, like, the fact that they look the same right now is a complete coincidence. What we care about is that the denominator right here, this is positive, and then we changed it to a negative. So that's how this came about. We were like, 2 plus root 3? How about 2 minus root 3? And now we're going to multiply top and bottom by that. That's the conjugate. And the reason we do that is because this gives us difference of squares, right? If you recall from quadratics, if you have a plus b and you multiply that by a minus b, you end up with a squared minus b squared. A squared, there we go, minus b squared. Which means this radical sign is going to go away in the denominator. So I'm going to now FOIL out my numerator and FOIL out my denominator. So my numerator, my first, outer, inner, last, as I FOIL it, it's going to give me this. My terms combine, my radical, my root 3 goes away. At the end, I square it. Combine my like terms, I get 7 minus 4 root 3 in the numerator. In the denominator, I'm going to get my difference of squares, right? So I'm going to end up with 2 squared minus root 3 squared, which is going to be 1. So putting all this together, I end up with, well, 7 minus 4 root 3, or answer choice A. Now, if you went with answer choice B, you landed into one of the most common traps with this type of equation or this expression, which is you tried to cancel out the individual terms rather than canceling out the individual factors. Now, if this is brand new stuff, if you're like, whoa, 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 hold up, what just happened here? Then what I want you to take away from this is just the simple fact that you can't just cancel these things out. So eliminate the answer choice that does that and guess one of the others, right? But for hopefully some of you, this is also a review of when to use the conjugate, what that conjugate looks like, and how to FOIL out those binomials once you've done it. So the process here is the same foiling, is the same thing as you do with a quadratic. It just happens to be, in this case, we have roots. And of course, if this is a calculator question, you just stick it in your calculator and get one of the answer choices. Now, I love what PSAT official says. Not a PSAT official. I will just skip this question on the PSAT. Lol. Good. Yeah, good. Guess an answer choice. Move on. And if it's one that you don't know how to do, now save yourself that time and invest it somewhere else. That's another good thing, even if you're thinking like, man, I don't even know how to do some of these. How is this useful? You're becoming more comfortable with knowing when not to waste your time on a question. Right? And that's also valuable knowledge that you can use because now you're going to spend that time on questions that you can do, and that's still going to get you more points. If you guys, I legit forgot the concept of conjugates until today. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you all are here today because you have now remembered this. And when this shows up on test day, you're going to be like, poof, good thing I was listening. We're going to get like a double, triple-decker star for that one there. Nice work. All right, here is our next question. Boris has got that poll open for you. Thank you, Boris. Here you go. This one is dealing with a graph. Rock it out. I love Gigi's initial responses was like, ooh, transformations, yay! And I can see some of you go, ooh, transformations, ah! Here's the thing about transformations. Well, I like to categorize things thusly. If it's outside the parentheses, it does what you think it should do. So negative goes down, positive goes up, like that sounds normal, right? Down is down, up is up, we're good to go. If it's inside the parentheses, it's backwards territory. So left is right, right is left. So negative means right, positive means left. That's like the opposite of what we would think it should be. So outside the parentheses is normal, inside the parentheses, opposite land. So here we go. We've got this function here that tells us that this is f of x. And now we're going to transform it, which means we're going to like shift it up or down or right or left. And we want to transform it into this. So first thing we're going to do is find a point that we can rely on, because shifting an entire line that is like trying to eat an entire pizza in one bite, it is too much. So I'm going to grab a point here. I'm going to grab 0, 1 looks good to go. Like boom, there's, let me move that over. There is my point, 0, 1. Now, -5 is outside the parentheses. So I'm going to move this down 5 because that's normal, right? Negative means down 5. So my point was originally at 1. If I subtract 5 from it, I'm going to move it down to -4 because that's what down 5 means. Now I have my -2 inside the parentheses. So what are we going to have to do to x to like cancel out the -2? We're going to have to add 2. So we're moving it 2 to the right. -2 inside the parentheses is opposite land. This means 2 to the right. I'm going to move my point over 2 to the right. Okay, I just transformed this single point on the graph. Which of these graphs has that point? No, no, no. And we're done. That's it. Now, I love how in the poll we've got this like tug of war between A and B, because what that says is that we look down here and we said, -5, that means moving it down. C and D, get out of here. Nice work. Now what do we do with A or B? What are we going to do? A just moves it down. It doesn't transform it to the right or left. It doesn't do anything with this x minus 2. It means you dealt with a -5. Nice work. That's half the battle here, but we have to do the entire problem. So we also have to move it over. So pick a point, move it down, move it over, and then locate it. Whoops, locate it on the graph. And I probably saying, let's see. I try to follow the point on the computer. My brain is like, what is this other point? Here's the same point. I see. So just on your test day, you can either do it. You can write it out like this. This is another way to do it. If you can't like move a graph, if the graphs are too small, you can write out a point and say, well, y is down 5. 1 minus 5 is -4. Here's my new point. Here's my other point. You can do it algebraically as well, or like arithmetically, or you can try to track the point there on the graph itself. So big takeaway, I see guess 3335 says, I understand now. Awesome. Outside the parentheses does what you expect. Inside the parentheses, opposite land, every single time. Okay, we've got a couple more to do, guys. We are like rocking and rolling through these. Oh, I guess I should give a star for this one. Good job. Here we go. 2 more questions. This is question number 6. Boris has that poll open for you. Thank you, Boris. Lock it in when you got it. This is one of those wackadoodle questions that you see on the PSAT sometimes where you're like, what sort of math is this? Now, I love what Daniel says. This was fun. I just had to find the pattern. And guess 4-9, you promptly followed up was like, or you could find the function. Guess what, folks? When you're finding a pattern, you're actually finding a function. Like that's kind of what's going on here. There's other ways you could deal with this too. You wouldn't necessarily have to find the function. You could also use some good old process of elimination as well. So we want to know how many shingles will the 7th house have? And it tells us that there is a pattern, right? That there is a function here between the house number, which we see here, 1, 2, 3, and the number of shingles on the house, 12, 15, and 20. So we're looking for the 7th house, which is like, over here somewhere. There's like house 7. So we can start eliminating. First off, if house 3 has 20 shingles, the 7th house is going to have more than 20 shingles. So we can already eliminate answer choice A because that just doesn't make any sense, right? The house number is not the same as the shingles on the house. Let's get rid of it. So let's take a look at the other ways we can think of a pattern. Now, guess 965 says, well, the pattern goes from 3 to 5 to 7 to 9. Exactly. So we might say, okay, this is 3, this is 5. So the next house is going to be 7. Oh, wait, the next house has 7? Well, then that means house 4 has 27 shingles, not house 7. So we can also get rid of answer choice B. So even if you haven't figured out the pattern yet, you still could eliminate half of your answer choices just by looking at what you already do know. Now we have to figure out between 46 and 60. We've already figured out our pattern, which goes 3, 5, 7, 9. We know this is non-linear. So we can come up with a function here. We can try a quadratic function, which is we square the house number and we add 11. That's actually our function. 1 squared plus 11 gives us 12. 2 squared plus 11 gives you 15. 3 squared plus 11 gives you 20. That's our function. Our function is 8 squared plus 11. We could plug in 7 and we would get our answer choice. Now, some of you said, I just used the pattern and I just kept it going. Awesome. That works as well. Because when you have a function, you're going to have a table of values, or you could make a table of values that would follow that pattern. So whether you actually decided to write it as a function and then evaluate the function, or whether you decided to do what many of you did, which is, well, I added 3, then 7, then 9, write out a table of values, and then just like looked at what you got with 7, you still applied the same kind of thinking, which is inputs and outputs. So our answer here is going to be 60. Now Victoria says, well, I didn't get the function and used elimination. You know what, Victoria, if you got the right answer and it was through this kind of, elimination process, you still answered the question correctly and accurately, and cyber high five for that, because there are many ways to get the right answers on PSAT math questions. And one of the biggest fallacies is to go into this test and say, I have to do it the math class math way or I've done it wrong. Not true. If you are like, well, it's not A, it's not B, it's not C, guess it's D, you got the right answer. And that is all that matters. I'll actually give you all a barbecue star for that. I know barbecue is not usually my flavor of stars, but elimination for the win. So I'm going to add like some like mustard stars and relish stars here for that as well. A whole big barbecue picnic. Don't feel as if you have failed yourself if you didn't see a certain way of solving a problem. If you solved a problem using accurate thinking and you got it right, that's a win. If you just said, you know what, this question isn't worth my time, and you guessed and got it right, that's a win. And if you said, you know what, this question isn't worth my time, and you guessed and got it wrong, that's still not a loss because you didn't waste your time doing something that you didn't know how to do. And you spent that time wisely somewhere else. So part of standardized testing is like getting yourself in a different mindset from school tests. On school tests, they're testing what you've been taught. You're supposed to the goal is to get them all right? 100% is always the goal, and showing your work and doing it the way you've been taught. That's always the goal in those types of exams. This is not that type of exam. So the idea here is to rack up as many points as you can, however you can, and doing that sometimes requires to do something a different way. And if you come up with a different way that works, that's awesome. And totally worth a star. Give yourself a star. Give yourself a cyber high five for that. All right, here is our last advanced question. I got to give you guys props. You are hanging in for some tough stuff here. Feeling really proud of everyone here in the chat, asking some good questions, and also being comfortable saying, I didn't know this one, because that's honestly how you learn, is when you start to acknowledge what you don't know, rather than just, keep reinforcing what you do. So here you go. Here's our final question. We have, by the way, another transformation. So see how much you can do based on even that review that we just did of a linear transformation just a moment ago. And this will be our final math question of the day. Good luck. Boris has a poll open for you. Thank you, Boris. Knock it out. All right, now I noticed a couple of you are saying, but the axes. I'm so glad you're being cognizant of things like axes because as we've seen in other cases, not paying attention to the scale of a chart or graph or figure or something like that can make a difference. So even though the scale of these looks a little wonky, some of these have kind of like squashed a little bit. Always just reiterating to yourself, like, okay, what is the scale? What does each hash mark represent? That is going to be something very useful for you. Okay. Now, in this case, they didn't give you f of x. Well, they did, but f of x wasn't just some sort of line. Here, f of x equals x minus 4 quantity squared. And they've gone ahead and they've graphed this quadratic for us. And we want to know which of the following depicts the transformation g of x equals this. Well, here's the thing. F of x is very different than g of x, right? So all we have to do is look to see, so what is g of x? That's really what we're interested in here. So we're going to go and we're going to say, okay, well, this is going to be moved up 3, right? Because that is outside of inner square parentheses. So we can also just kind of like plug in a point, right? G of x, toss in a 0. You can grab some points there. So our original here is going to be h of x is the same thing as, it's kind of like x squared. By the way, if we transformed this back to where it originally was, we would see that that is just plotting the x squared graph, right? Because if this is the transformation shown here, then we know our original graph is actually just going to be 4 to the, this is 4 to the right. So if we move it back 4 over to the left, we would just have x squared. So somebody's like, is this a trick question? Yeah, you actually didn't have to deal with this whole thing at all over here. We just have to say, okay, so what is the graph of this? That's really what the question is. What is the graph of this right here with a whole bunch of extra extraneous information? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, well, it's up 3. We can get rid of some of these. Here is this point that we're looking for. 2, 3, that's going to be our vertex. Remember, this is in vertex form. It's another way we could look at it. We could also say that this is going to be flipped, right? We're not going to flip it upside down because this is inside the parentheses, right? So when that gets squared out, that's going to be positive. So I'm saying, oh, I got so many things in the chat I got to think. Sorry, let me look at your chats here. So g of x is the same thing as x minus 2 corner squared plus 3. Nice from guest 409. Because this negative is inside, we're basically thinking of this as x. You can think of it as 2 minus x rather than negative x plus 2 squared. Jaden says, the main trick here is you had to factor the negative sign. Yep, that's exactly what you had to take care of here. Really what we have here is if we want to make this equal to 0, we're going to have to have this be positive 2 rather than negative 2 because of that point right there. So here we have 2, 3. That is going to be the vertex of this particular parabola. Okay, so couple of questions here. So Shay says, why does it give f of x and then give g of x? Totally extraneous information. You actually didn't need to use any of this information at all. It says, hey, this is a graph of f of x that's been transformed. Here's which of these is g of x. G of x is a separate function, so we can just graph which one this one is. Happens to be that even if this was the same thing as g, this would transform back just straight up into an x squared function, so you could have treated it the same way. You could have said, well, so I'm going to have to transform it up. I'm going to have to shift it over to the, in this case, right, because of this negative sign. So what we're doing is we're just graphing this one here. Pay attention, this negative sign right there, it means that the vertex is going to be positive 2, 3, rather than negative 2, 3. That's what you would have ended up with answer choice C. And I think we were really torn between answer choices A and C. Notice how right here this is in vertex formula or vertex format, so you can set those, you can use the vertex format to think about what the vertex of the parabola would be and go from there. Carol says, what exactly does the negative x do? So one way we could think about this is normally when we have a plus 2 inside the parentheses, that would shift it to the right. Shift it to the left. In this case, we really want to think about, what would make this back equal to 0? In this case, it would be shifting the x 2 to the right. An x of positive 2 would set that equal to 0. So if we had, basically we could test a point. We could test these vertexes and we could say, okay, if I plug in 2, do I get 3? Yes, that is a point that's going to be on this parabola because 2, 3 is an outcome. If I plug in 2, I get 3 as an outcome. I could test the vertex here. If I plug in negative 2, do I get positive 3? No, I don't. Now over here, I would say, well, this does have the right vertex, but we don't have this being flipped upside down, right? There's no negative. This isn't negative g of x. It's not flipping the whole thing. We're not reflecting it in that direction. And here, this is 3, 2. So this one doesn't have that vertex at all. So another way you can go about these types of questions, by the way, without thinking about the transformations at all, is to test a point. Test a point, plug it and check it. Does the point work? It does, test another point, right? In this case, we could have tested something like the Y-intercept to figure out between A and B if you were testing those vertices. All right, nice work on this one. I know we ended up with a bit of a tricky one here, but hopefully you've got some good takeaways. Go ahead and give me one of your final takeaways here with math. In a couple of minutes, Boris is going to pop into the hot seat, and we're going to end today's session with an hour of advanced verbal. So get prepared to apply everything that you've done with your passage maps as well as some of that writing language in the final hour of today's prep.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to or welcome back to PSAT Prep Live here with Kaplan. My name is Boris. I'll be with you on camera this final hour as we work on advanced verbal. I know for a lot of you this is hour 4 coming up. Woof. Some of you this is maybe closer to hour 8. Let me know in the chat, how are you feeling? How's the old life treating you here as we get into our final hour of preparation for today's PSAT Prep Live programming? David is excited for the final hour because time flies when it's fun. That's terrific. As always, I'm not your only teacher. Stephanie, who is just on camera, has popped into the off camera, switching places with me. Also, we have Katie and David who are still answering your questions. They are phenomenal PSAT experts, so please don't stop asking them questions because they can help you do your best. Now, just a quick bit of bookkeeping before we get started. This is our last session today, but we do have 2 more sessions coming up this week. Tomorrow, we have our PSAT Prep Live Top 5 Math Tips. That is from 7 p.m. Eastern to 9 p.m. Eastern. Make sure to account for time zones, and you can see on your page the schedule. And then Tuesday, we have the top 5 verbal tips. So we're not done with PSAT Prep Live goodness, but we are going to be done after this hour. Now, I'm not going to do the scoring stuff and whatever at the introduction, but if you are just joining, this is like your very first session, make sure that you check out like the first session from today or the first session from yesterday, where we go over in more detail the introductory stuff for the PSAT. What I would like to do here is give you a chance to do some advanced practice entirely on your own. We're going to see some reading practice here. And we're also going to do some writing and language practice because we really only have done writing and language once. That was yesterday in our writing and language session, so I do want to make sure that we include some writing and language practice as well. Okay, so you know the drill. What I'm going to do here is give you about 40 seconds to read and annotate the beginning of this passage, and then we'll move on to the next paragraph of the passage until you've had enough time to read the whole thing. So good luck and enjoy your strategic reading and annotating. All right, folks, hope you have your notes written down for the opening blurb and that first paragraph. Let's take a look at the next paragraph. Again, I'm going to give you a little more than half a minute for it. Read it, annotate it, add it to your outline, and then we'll move on. See you soon. All right, folks, nice work on that one. It's time for the next paragraph. This one's actually a really, really long one, so I'm going to split it into 2 bits for you. So take the first bit, see what you can think is worth annotating, and then we'll continue on with it on the next slide. See you soon. Okay, folks, let's continue the rest of this gargantuan paragraph. See how the second half of the paragraph might change the way that you want to annotate it. See you in about 40 seconds. All right, folks, let's go ahead and move into our fourth paragraph. This is another long one. I'm again going to give you 40 seconds for it. So enjoy the reading and annotating, and I'll see you in 40 seconds to do our final paragraph. Folks, there's one paragraph left. Here it is. It's a very long one. I'm going to give you a whopping 45 seconds to read it and annotate it. Good luck. Enjoy this practice, and we'll come back together and review for the big picture before I give you some questions to do entirely on your own. Enjoy. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a step back, review the passage as a whole, get some good annotations going, and then I'm going to give you some questions to try entirely on your own. Here we go with the first paragraph, going back to the beginning. Tell me, please, in the chat, what was the topic or the broad subject of the passage that you just worked on? This is a passage about declining Norse colonies in Greenland. This is a case where the opening blurb was really, really great because we have this anthropological mystery. We know what the mystery was about. Almost certainly this is going to be a passage to try to explain why these Norse colonies disappeared. So there's a lot of different ways that you could annotate the beginning of this. Again, there's no one right or wrong way to annotate, but if you made something like this, if you said, okay, we got our Norse, or as we learn later, nose colonies. We got their disappearance. It's a nice little reminder for yourself of like what the passage is going to be about. Now, the first paragraph was basically just background information. It was like, wait, there were some Norse colonies, and then they disappeared. So, okay, don't really have to annotate much for that. Let me know in the chat, folks, what was paragraph 2 about? Well, here we had a theory. The theory is that maybe warfare was the reason why the Norse colonies disappeared. And let me know in the chat, folks, what does the author think about this theory? At the end, we have this nice contrast word, however, in line 21. It says there's no evidence. Modern scholars give little credence to these theories. I mean, that's pretty clear. Author thinks, nope. That is not the reason for the disappearance of the Norse colonies. And so now, if you're a strategic reader, although this is a pretty complicated history passage, you actually feel in command. Because while the individual details might be a little bit complex and there's tons and tons and tons of facts, big picture-wise, you might be going, oh, well, I know exactly what's going to happen here. There's going to be some other explanations for why the Norse colonies disappeared. And it ends up being very nice because every paragraph discusses one possible theory. Paragraph 3, the really big honker that we had to split up into two, gives us another explanation for why the Norse colonies disappeared other than warfare. Let me know in the chat, folks. What was that other theory? Oh, hey, a good question from Daniel. Were we using the same passages last year? Yes, we have the same, at the moment, content every year. So if you do go year to year, you'll recognize them. Here we had a new theory, and this one was based on climate. Now, unlike the warfare theory, this one does not get refuted by the end of the paragraph. So as far as we know, this is a possible theory. And again, there's different ways to annotate. Some of you said climate like I did. Others of you, like Guess 95, said temperature. PSAT Master said mini ice age. Guess 3924 said harsh climate. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to annotate it. Again, there's no right or wrong way to annotate, just whatever way is helpful for you. Paragraph 4 gave a different theory. Let me know in the chat, what field of human study was this theory based on? So this one, it gave away the goose in the opening line, changing economic conditions. Okay, so maybe economics was the reason why these colonies declined. And then the whole paragraph ended up being about economics. Notice, you don't have to actually understand the theory. I'm not saying you shouldn't read the paragraph, you should, because what if the author threw in some other random theory later on, like, oh, well, maybe because they all ate poisoned ice cream. Oh, okay, better note that down. But like, this one ended up being all about economics. You don't have to understand the theory, though. You just have to understand the fact that this was all the economics explanation, and if a question asks about it, then you'll look it up in this paragraph, and then you'll like hunker down and really pay attention. But if no question on the test ever requires you to understand the nuts and bolts of this theory, it is absolutely a waste of your time to try to learn the nuts and bolts of how this theory goes and how this theory thinks economics was the downfall of the colonies. And then we had another theory. I was kind of impressed. Honestly, I was like, well, what? Okay, there's war, there's climate, there's economics. What else is there? Well, there was another one. Let me know in the chat, folks, what was the final theory in the final paragraph for the disappearance of the Norse colonies. So here we have, again, in the opening line, a dead giveaway, cultural and sociological factors. So this is the culture theory. Now this paragraph was all about the culture theory, but it does also illustrate the value of reading the whole paragraph. Sometimes people get a little bit too excited about our strategic passage mapping strategy and they skip around. They like skim or just jump past a bunch of text. But if you read through this whole thing, it said, this stubborn cultural inflexibility prevented the Norse civilization in Greenland from adapting to environmental and economic conditions. Wait a minute. So we had an environment paragraph and an economics paragraph. So the author actually thinks that the true reason was a mix of all three. It wasn't just economics, and it wasn't just the climate, and it wasn't just their culture sucking. It was all three of these things working together to wipe out the poor, beleaguered Norse colonies. Okay, so there's our passage. To recap, there was some colony that disappeared. Why did it disappear? Was it warfare? Nope. Was it climate? Maybe. Was it economics? Maybe. Was it culture? Maybe. Oh, author says at the very end, it was probably all three. Done. So although this was in some ways the most complicated passage that we did in all of PSAT Prep Live this weekend, because it just had so many words. It was, by the way, a full-length passage too. So if you were able to do it within the time that I gave you, great. That just shows that strategic reading and passage mapping can help you get a passage done in a good amount of time. Even though it was so complicated and full length, it in a way was the easiest because the structure was so good, and you can take advantage of that on your test. Okay, let's take a look at question number 1. Main purpose of the passage, a global question. I'm going to go ahead and give you about 30 seconds to puzzle it out. If you followed the Kaplan strategy or were here when we reviewed it together, you may already know the answer. Stephanie, please give us a poll for number 1, and I'll see you in half a minute, folks, to review. Good luck and enjoy the practice. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review. What was the main purpose of the passage? Well, it was to put out some possible theories to explain why these colonists disappeared. So, most popular choice in the poll, choice A, explain possible theories explaining a historical event. Well, was there a historical event? Yeah. Was the author trying to explain it? Yeah. Were there some possible theories? Yeah. Everything's good about choice A. We're going to go ahead and grab it. You do not even need to read choices B, C, or D. You can just pick it and move on. Practice this attitude. You should say to yourself, I'm a PSAT god. If I think it's A, it is A because I'm awesome. End of story. Pick it and move on. Now, choice B, refute a commonly held belief about a group of people. Did the author do that? Yes. But was that the whole point of the passage? No, that's just one paragraph, the warfare paragraph. So we're going to cross it off. Watch out on global questions for answer choices that are overly specific, meaning they are things the passage did, but they were not the main point of the passage. Choice C is overly specific. It's only about the warfare paragraph, and the warfare paragraph didn't even say that, so we can cross off C. And then finally, choice D says that these are conflicting explanations. Now, that's a bit of a tough one to puzzle out why it's wrong, but if you caught the last line of the passage and realized that the author was connecting the cultural, economic, and environmental explanations, then they're not conflicting. They must all be possible at the same time. So for that reason, it ain't D. We got to go back and pick choice A. Okay, folks, nice work. Number 2. The author implies that during the period in which the Norse settlements were initially founded, the climate in the region was what? Okay, let me know in the chat, folks, which paragraph, before I give you this one to do on your own, will I need to put up on the screen for you to do your research to make a prediction for number 2. Big clue, climate. That means we're going to have to go into that big honker of a third paragraph to look up information about the climate. So what I'm going to do here is give you a chance to make a prediction on your own from the third paragraph, and then we'll come back in the answer choices and do a quick vote. All right, I'm going to give you half a minute, do some research, and then we'll reconvene. All right, folks, let me know in the chat. What does this paragraph say about the climate when the colony was first settled? Yeah, right around line 35, it says, such studies point toward a particularly warm period for Greenland that occurred between the years when blah, 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 when the colony was settled. So our prediction for this one is particularly warm period. Now look at the answer choices, and if you'd be so kind, please vote in the poll for the answer choice provided by Stephanie that you would pick on test day. This was a little bit tough. We got a divergence of answers in the poll. Every choice got at least some love. Because a lot of these make sense for what the temperature was like when the colony failed. Right? If you're thinking about the environmental explanation for why the colony declined, it was that there was a mini ice age and things got really, really cold. But notice, the question's asking you what it was like when it was initially founded. So a choice like D, which would be about why the colony failed, would be incorrect. Unusually harsh, again, that would be why the colony failed. Inhospitable in choice B, again, that would be why it failed. So you got to grab choice A. The climate was uncharacteristically mild, meaning particularly warm, meaning warmer than you'd expect. So it's kind of a bait and switch. Greenland was kind of like, hey, Norse colonists, got some warm climate for you over here. Why don't you come on down and settle? And the Norse colonists like, okay, guys, sounds great. And then it gets super freezing right after they set up shop there. So we're going to grab A, and we're going to move on with the PSAT. All right, let's take a look at number 3. Oh, hey, it's a command of evidence question. Well, we kind of just did that. One of the nice things about command of evidence questions that follow really hard questions is that chances are, to make a prediction for a really hard question, you have to find proof in the passage before you have any clue what the answer is. So we go back at this one, choice A. How do you know that it was uncharacteristically mild? Well, I scroll back up through the chat. You guys are all looking at lines 35, 36, 37. And I'll show you that right here. Right in 35 it began, such studies point toward a particularly warm period. So that is our jackpot. We're really hoping that an answer choice includes lines 35, 36, and 37. If it does, we're going to smash it and go. If it doesn't, we're going to skip the problem. Now on this one, we do have it. Oh, look at that, line 38. Okay, cool. Grab choice B for Boris and move on with the PSAT. Hard question. People are going to waste all kinds of hilarious time on this one reading all of these references. But if you're following our strategy and making a prediction, trying to pretend to an imaginary friend where you'd point in the passage to definitively prove your answer, then it doesn't even seem like a hard one. It's almost like, well, why is this in the advanced deck? That was a piece of cake. Well, not exactly. It just seems easy if you have a good strategy. All right, folks, good work. Now, a few of you are asking, hey, what about writing and language practice? Absolutely. Let's do some writing and language practice as well. So what I'm going to do here is jump to our writing and language practice, and then depending on how well we do on it or how quickly it takes, we might come back and do a little bit of a bonus practice for reading comp. But to make sure that we get through all of our writing and language questions, let's jump there right now. This is a passage titled The Taj Mahal. Now, one of our strategy points for writing and language, folks, was that you should read all the text. Read everything. Don't just jump from question to question because you might need some of the background context to answer some of the tougher problems. Now, for number 1, you can see that we have an underline, but also a lot of reading around it. So I'm going to give you a good chunk of time on this. I'll give you 30 seconds to read it and pick an answer in the poll provided by Stephanie. And when time is up, we're going to review. Good luck and enjoy the practice. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and review our answer for this problem. So remember, step 1 for writing in language is to identify the issue being tested. Now let me know in the chat, what was the issue being tested here on number 8? It's a bit of a tricky one. I'm not going to say that it's easy, because this is a really advanced problem. But if you caught what issue was being tested, if you could execute step 1, this question would have seemed easy. The issue being tested here, folks, is modification, because the sentence that contains this underline begins with the words, built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. And then there was a whole bunch of fluff text. Now, I'm not saying it's not important in the sense of it's not important to the passage, but for this question, blah, 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 that's not actually important. That's not grammatically important. We have built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan as whatever, 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 comma. That's a modifier. So, hey, Cyber 5, a lot of you caught that. Terrific, Anna. Excellent, 965 and 9022. Nice job. So, the rule for modifiers is very simple. It's just that the modifier needs to be as close as possible to what it's modifying. So let me know in the chat, folks. What was built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan? That would be the Taj Mahal. So when we go to step 2 and we eliminate answers, we're going to eliminate any answer that does not begin with Taj Mahal. It can't be choice A. You don't build construction. Construction is the act of building something. You're not going to be like, hey, Boris, did you finish building that construction yet? Oh, yeah, that construction's totally built, boss. You got it. Okay, cool. Good job, Boris. Have a raise. No, you don't build construction. You build the building. So it can't be A. For that same reason, choice C is wrong. Sorry, C for Stephanie. C is a fake out. It looks good. The Taj Mahal. But then apostrophe S, the Taj Mahal's construction. No, they did not build the construction. They built the Taj Mahal. Construction was the act of building the Taj Mahal, but you build the Taj Mahal, you don't build construction. So C is gone. And then choice B, I like that one too. Plans. You don't build plans. All right, unless you're some creepy guy in a basement like, I'm building some plans. No, so we're going to have to get rid of that. Only one choice even tries to put the Taj Mahal first. That's choice D. Taj Mahal is a tomb, so they built the tomb. It's right after the comma. We're going to grab D for domination and move on with the PSAT. Folks, nice work. Here's number 9. If you'd be so kind. Stephanie, please give us a poll for number 9. And folks, I'm going to give you half a minute to work on it. When time is up, we're going to review it. Good luck and enjoy the practice. Good recap on the last one, yes. In the last one, C was wrong precisely because of the apostrophe. Now, this one was a bit of a tricky one. We had a bit of a tug of war between choice A and choice D. Let's find out if one of them is right or the other, or neither one of them is right. So here we go. It says the Taj Mahal is an expression of love and loss. Now, there's nothing wrong with that sentence. It's a totally perfectly good sentence. But it is a sentence at the beginning of the paragraph. And every single answer choice has transition words in it. In addition, nonetheless, given its beauty. So this is a case where you really see the value of step 1. Our step 1 for writing in language is identify the issue being tested and use the choices if need be. I'm not saying that A is not the correct answer, but if you just look at it and pick choice A, at least sometimes you'll be wrong, because the issue being tested, which you can only tell looking at the answer choices, is transitions. So it's like, okay, well, what transition would make sense here? Let me know in the chat, folks. If you kept on reading the paragraph, what did this paragraph end up being about? As you kept going, the paragraph ended up being about the design and the construction of the Taj Mahal, which doesn't have anything to do with love and loss. So, as an introduction to the paragraph, this sentence doesn't work. Grammatically, it's totally fine, but grammar wasn't the issue. The issue was transitions. How do I introduce this paragraph in a correct way? So, if we go with choice A or choice B, or our most popular answer, choice D, all of them make it sound as if this is a paragraph about love and loss. But it's not a paragraph about love and loss. The only kind of transition that would make sense is a contrast. So, dark horse, choice C for Stephanie pops up, and we move on with the PSAT. So, hope you believe that this is truly an advanced lesson. Initially, like 10% of people picked choice C. It was the third most popular choice out of 4. It's a very, very tough problem. But when you get a question wrong like this, don't be mad. Be delighted by the thought that people on test day who are not you are going to have no chance. They're going to have no idea what to do. And so they're going to step below you in the fight for the National Merit Scholarship selection ranking score that's good enough to get that finalist standing. You have to realize what issue is being tested. If choice A doesn't have any transitions, it doesn't necessarily mean that transitions cannot be the topic. You have to consider the choices when deciding what topic is being tested, and once you figure it out, use that to make your judgment call. All right, so good work. If you got it wrong, terrific. Better now than on test day, especially for such a difficult problem. All right, I'm going to give you number 10 now, if you'd be so kind. Stephanie, please open up a new poll for number 10. Folks, I'm going to see you in about half a minute. Good luck, and enjoy all that practice. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review question number 10. So number 10 was a bit of a tricky one because, again, there was nothing wrong with it grammatically. Grammatically, there was nothing wrong. But what you noticed if you looked at the answer choices in step 1 as you tried to figure out the issue is the test makers were testing conciseness. Every single answer choice says kind of, sort of the same thing. So the question then becomes, can we chop away some words? This is a good tip for the PSAT. Whenever the answer choices all seem to be saying mostly the same thing, check for conciseness. Now, the shortest choice here is choice B. You got to ask yourself, does B work? Can I say, its architect employed centuries of Iranian and Central Asian mausoleum design to construct a breathtakingly symmetrical representation of heaven? That seems fine to me. So what do we do? Well, A, C, and D all say the same thing as B, but they all have extra words in them, so they cannot be correct. They would all be less concise than B without having any additional relevance, so it must be choice B. Grab choice B and move on with the PSAT. This one had initially about 54% of the vote going for B, so a majority of us got it right, but a very narrow one, which is what you'd expect on a tough problem. And yet, if you know the types of things the PSAT tests, then this one is one you might breeze by and not even realize it was difficult. Because you say, oh, the choices all say the same thing. So it's a conciseness question. B is the most concise, and it works. I'm going to grab it. Now, I want to backpedal a bit and just be very careful. Choice length is irrelevant on the writing and language test. Do not use choice length as a guide, except when conciseness is the issue being tested, then go ahead with choice length. But only when the choices all say the same thing should you start comparing the length of choices to each other. And by the way, I want to point out one more thing, although it didn't end up mattering too much. This one has something that the PSAT and the SAT both really hate, which is subject repetition. We have architect and then we have he. Notice that A did this and C did this. The SAT and the PSAT do not like this. The test makers are like allergic, like vampires to garlic, about subjects being repeated when they don't have to be. Notice how B gets rid of that extra he. That's part of why it ends up being a shorter answer. So in other problems where it's more relevant to catch that, do note that you should not repeat subjects on this test. Okay, nice job. So let's take a look at next, number 11. There's a lot of reading here for number 12, so make sure you do it either for number 11 or for number 12. For this one, I'm going to give you about half a minute. Stephanie, if you'd be so kind, please open up a poll for number 11, and I'll see you in half a minute, folks, to review. Good luck, and enjoy the practice. All right, folks, let me know in the chat, what did you think was the issue being tested here on number 11? It's a little bit tough to tell, but when you look at the answer choices, you realize that they're all one word and they're all grammatically correct. You can put any one of these words in there and it's a grammatically correct sentence. They're all one word, so they're all equally concise. So if they're all equally concise and they're all grammatically correct, what's going on? Well, this is something that we like to call precision. The PSAT is testing your understanding of meaning. What meaning would make sense in this spot? So that's a good giveaway to look for on your test. If the choices all mean different things, that's what you should be checking. Not grammar, but logic in meaning. Okay, so let's see what the blank is then. Kind of like if it was a vocab in context question for reading comp. It says, the other is a replica of the mosque placed there to blank the complex is unearthly proportionality. So I want something like keep or maintain, right? Because you got one thing over here and another thing over here, and having them both lets you have a lot of proportionality. So let's take a look at our options. Every choice got at least some love. A says conserve. Now that may be tempting, but the problem with conserve is that if you're conserving something, it has to be a spendable resource. Like if you're conserving water, it means you're using water, but you're not using it as much as you could be. You don't spend proportionality. You can't be like, hey, can I get your Pokemon card? Sure, man. I'll give it to you for 50 proportionalities. Oh, fine. I'll give you some of my proportionality. I was trying to conserve it, but no, you can't spend it. So for that reason, we're going to get rid of choice A. Attenuate means to lessen, which is the opposite of what we need, so that's no good. And then choice D, reserve, again, it has kind of a similar problem to conserve. You don't reserve it, like keep it back, so you can use it later. You don't really use proportionality, you just have it or you don't. So only C for Stephanie works on this one. We're going to go ahead and grab this choice, confirm it, and move on with the PSAT. All right, folks, nice job on that one. Now let's take a look at number 12. I'm going to give you some extra time on this one for reading, because the reading might matter for the last question that we have coming up after this. I'm going to go ahead and give you 45 seconds. The question itself and voting in Stephanie's poll might not take that much time, but you might want to spend some extra time to read. All right, I'll see you in 3/4 of a minute. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review number 12. So this one, let me know in the chat, what was the topic being tested? Here, all the answer choices really said the exact same thing. The test makers are trying to trip you up by having tons and tons of words in all the answers, but they all say the same thing. And I know some of you are like, this was an easy one. What's it doing in the... Only 2/3 of us got this one right, so a whopping third of us missed it. It only seems easy if you already have the mind that you need to have to crack the PSAT. Cybri 5, everybody. Yes, the topic being tested is conciseness because in step 1, when you analyze the choices, you realize that they're all saying the same thing. So what's the shortest one? It's D. Does D work? It does, so every other choice must be wrong. If they all say the same thing, then it's the shortest one that must be right because of conciseness. Grab D for domination and move on with the PSAT. All right, nice work. Here's our final writing and language question. We have to establish the main topic of the paragraph. So I'm going to give you some extra time because you might need to hint, read the paragraph beyond where the question is. I'm going to see you in 3/4 of a minute. Stephanie, please pop open a poll for our last writing and language question, and we're going to review when time is up. See you soon. All right, folks, you tell me in the chat, please, what was the topic of this paragraph? Well, if we look through the paragraph, what it had is a lot of stuff between, like, yin and yang, this and that. We have serenity and symmetry. We have balance between a whole bunch of stuff. Curves and straight lines, bulges, straight lines and curves, recesses and bulges, solidarity and form, solidarity and empty space. We have another word here, equilibrium, which is great because that's reinforcing the balance from earlier. So lots of stuff forming a kind of balance. Okay, so once we realize that, then it's like, okay, look at the choices. Which one introduces us to the concept of balance? Choice A says, it's the best building ever. Well, maybe it is, but that's not what this paragraph ended up being about, so we're going to cross off A. B, serene majesty. That does not necessarily indicate any kind of balance, so we can get rid of this choice as well. Now, C mentions balance, so it's a contender. Choice D, really beautiful, really poetic answer, nothing in there about balance. So we're going to cross this off. So we're going to go ahead and grab choice C for Stephanie and move on with the PSAT because it's the only one that even tried to talk about the topic of the actual paragraph. Now, this question illustrates a very important point about PSAT writing and language. When there is a block of text leading up to a question, you have to read it. That's one of those corners that you cannot cut. I know it'd be tempting to be like, got a box, got some choices, you just dive in and get it done, baby. But no, you have to read the accompanying question because it sets the standards. It provides the rules that you're going to use to judge choices to be correct or incorrect. So here we have to establish the main topic. If we don't establish the main topic, no matter how good the sentence sounds, no matter how it might feel okay to have at the beginning of the paragraph, it's wrong. And that leaves only choice C. So we're going to grab it, and we're going to move on with the PSAT. All right, folks, good work. Let's take a look then at a little bit of bonus practice today. We're going to do just a smidgen of additional reading. Again, I'm going to give you a chance to practice our passage mapping strategy because that is very important. And we'll do a question or two after we're done reviewing the passage, depending on how much time we've got. So, starting off with this, I'm going to give you about half a minute. Read it, annotate it for the first paragraph, try to establish the topic of the passage, and we'll come back and go on to the next paragraph. Enjoy your reading practice. All right, folks, let's go ahead and move on to the next paragraph. It's a little short one. I'm going to give you about 20 seconds for it. Read it, annotate it, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, that was that paragraph. Here's paragraph 3, another pretty short one. I'm going to give you 20 seconds for it. Read through it, annotate it. We'll move on to paragraph 4. All right, folks, time for paragraph 4. A very, very short paragraph. Again, here's 20 more seconds to read it and annotate it. All right, folks, here's the final paragraph. Well, this one is a big one, so I will give you closer to a minute for this to read it and annotate it, and then we're going to review the passage together. See you in almost a minute. All right, folks, let's go ahead and review this passage. Tell me, please, in the chat, what was the topic or the broad subject of the passage that we just read? Kind of an esoteric scientific topic. Starts off pretty straightforward. Oh, okay. Language acquisition. And you can feel free to abbreviate that with smaller, shorter words if you like. That was just the words that were used in the blurb. But then what it turns out to be is about streams of sound. Like the baby hears lots of different sounds in the world and has to be able to distinguish them in order to be able to learn language. This is kind of a tricky topic. But keeping to the big picture is very helpful. You say, okay, I don't really know exactly what's going on, but that is definitely the topic. Okay, so then paragraph 2 got to that point more clearly. It says that infants must not only learn how to segment individual speech, but they must also be able to distinguish between concurrent streams of sound. So you can abbreviate this in lots of different ways. I like the word distinguish because the babies have to be able to tell one thing apart from another. Okay, then we get into some factors that the infants need in order to be able to pull this off. Here we have an example with the mom talking to the baby and why that poses challenges for the baby to learn. Paragraph 4 asks the crucial question. How do babies do it? How are babies able to actually pull this off? And in paragraph 5, the very long paragraph, the author finally answered that question. Let me know in the chat, folks, what's one of the things that babies need in order to help them differentiate the mama talking from random other noises in the environment? Very nice. So one issue is familiarity, which was mentioned second in line 48. Very nice. That's from Shade. Excellent, Kartik. And then the other one, as Daniel note, is loudness, or as guest 3335 said, loudness. So, how do babies tell apart your speech from random other noises? Well, it's a function of loudness and familiarity. The louder it is, the more likely they are to pay attention to it. The more familiar it is, the more likely they are to pay attention to it. So that was this passage. Basically, infants need to be able to tell different sounds apart to learn language, and they use loudness and familiarity to do that. Now, let's take a look at just a couple of questions here to round out our advanced practice for today. According to the info in paragraph 5, whether an infant is able to distinguish a certain voice depends partially on whether that voice is... Oh, wait a minute. We made that into our notes. It's right there. All right, so if you'd be so kind, Stephanie, please pop open a poll for number 4. Folks, go ahead and vote for the answer choice that matches what we just found in that last paragraph. Nice work, folks. Our prediction for this one needed to be loudness and familiarity. There's nothing loudness about any of these answer choices, but familiarity is there. So for that reason, we're going to go ahead and grab choice D for domination and move on with the PSAT. Folks, nice job. Now, I'm going to pick a question here. Number 5. Let me know in the chat, folks, what type of question was number 5. Here we have one that we learned about what seems like an eternity ago, just a couple hours ago in our question types lesson, vocab and context. So what do? You go back to line 38 and you predict what that word means in that line. So where is that line? It says, while most infants are capable of separating out two different voices despite the presence of additional competing streams of sound, this capability is predicated upon several specific conditions. Well, let me know in the chat, folks. If you had to replace this fancy schmancy scholarly talk with a more simple phrase or word, let me know in the chat, what would you put in here? You can honestly make predictions for these problems that are not grammatically correct. Like for me, when I see this, I think of like required. This capability requires several specific conditions. You can't put that in there because there was the helping verb is in front of it, but that's okay. It's not writing in language. You just got to pick a meaning that makes sense for this spot and the grammar will sort itself out. Now, a lot of you guys have great predictions here. Based on is terrific. From Carol, dependent on is really, really nice. Abby says depending on. Excellent. Okay, so now that we know that, we look at our answer choices. There isn't a choice that says based on or dependent on. So I love that because it means you guys are making true predictions, not using the answer choices before you had a prediction. Once you've got the prediction of based on or dependent on, only one answer choice can possibly convey even close to that level of meaning, and that's D. Because A, predicted by does not mean based on. These conditions are not conscious entities. They cannot predict things. They don't express things either. And replaced by doesn't make any sense because one is required for the other. It does not replace the other. So for that reason, we got to grab D for domination here and move on with the PSAT. All right, folks, great work. I'm going to put up a link here so that you can find where we review the PSAT Prep Live lessons. If you want to catch some recordings, you can come back to this page that you're on, and they will be uploaded sometime soon and available for a short time. You can also check out our SAT and ACT Prep YouTube channel, which doesn't have them yet, but will have them at some point soon. You can also check out one more link that I put into the chat here, captest.com/study/PSAT. There you'll find a practice test as well as some other additional free resources for your prep. And on the page that you're on, you can also see a schedule. We do have 2 more sessions coming up tomorrow night and Tuesday night, so I recommend checking those out. Let us know if you have any questions. We'll stick around for a couple minutes to answer them. But if you're heading out, thank you so much for coming today for 1, 2, 3, or 4 hours, however long you were here. It was our honor that you gave us your time, because for us, this is just fun. I know Stephanie and Katie and David and I, we look forward to this every single year, and it's just a blast for us. For you, maybe it's not quite as fun to spend 4 hours of your Sunday, doing PSAT prep instead of playing Among Us or whatever you might rather be doing with your time. So we appreciate you giving us your time. I wish you all the best of luck in your PSAT prep, and perhaps we'll see each other again tomorrow or Tuesday. Take care, everybody.